results as they happen now on BBC One. David Dimbleby presents Election Night 2008.
And welcome to election night, with results already being counted across the country. Council elections in England and Wales, millions of people entitled to vote, over 4,000 councillors being elected, and tomorrow the mayor and assembly elections for London. The impact of all this could hardly be greater on the Prime Minister. For a start, it's the first election he's faced as Prime Minister, the first test of how he's doing. For the Tories, a measure of how well Cameron's doing, whether they're making that kind of momentum that will take them through to a general election victory. For the Liberal Democrats, a chance to see whether their faith in Nick Clegg is justified. Now, in local elections, fantastically complex is all I can say. So we need all the expertise we've got. And luckily tonight we have Tweedledum and Tweedledee here, BBC's political editor Nick Robinson, and Professor Anthony King of Essex University. We've got leading figures from the political parties joining us. At the moment we have Tessa Giles, George Osborne and Charles Kennedy with us, and there'll be others following from them later on. And the cruel truths will be brought to us by Jeremy Vine.
Well, it was cruel, wasn't it, David, when Vince Cable, the Lib Dem, said Mr Brown had gone from Stalin to Mr Bean. Here we are in the Brown Portrait Gallery, looking at the picture of him when he started as leader, commander of all he surveyed, and then seeing gradually him getting more and more tired there as the snap election was cancelled, and then gradually the lost data discs and Northern Rock, and we'll ask whether by the end of tonight he ends up as Mr Bean. And of course a big part of that will be the London mayoral contest. We will try and bring some of these cartoon characters to life for you to see what happens there. And, well, we don't even need to name them, do we? We know who they are. Red Ken and Lord Snooty Boris Johnson and PC Paddock. We'll see how they fare against each other too. Back to you.
We'll be back with Jeremy from time to time. Well, frequently, really, to interpret all this. And the sort of excitement about these elections really, if the truth be told, focused on the Ken Livingstone-Boris Johnson battle, almost like Obama and Clinton at it all the time on television and their debates and all the rest of it. It sort of outshone all the local elections put together. And Emily Maitlis is going to be with, among other people, the bruised and battered campaigners down at London City Hall tonight.
Yes, tonight from the heart of London, we promise to bring you an evening of intrigue and gossip, perhaps the odd political fact. Here at City Hall, the home of London government, our three partisan bloggers that you see will be offering up the kind of political fact that politicians just can't reach. And of course, we promise genuinely to bring you results from the part of the country where you are. Well, here in London, we'll be considering the race that's on everybody's lips, Ken v Boris, perhaps a smattering of Brian thrown in. No results, of course, until tomorrow, but that doesn't stop the discussion. And I'll be joined by Boris's dad, by Dave from Blair, by Michael Portillo, and by dead ringer John Culshaw, who will be a basic nightmare.
Well, I would have liked to have had a stream of results to give at this stage, but I have got one very important result, so let's have that. This is our first result of the night. The Conservatives, it won't be any great surprise to anyone, hold on to Tamworth in Staffordshire, 24 council seats, a net gain of 1, Labour on 5, net loss of 1. It used to be Labour controlled. And that's all we have in for the moment, but we'll have more in very soon, I've no doubt. Nick, any news for a start?
Well, the news is actually coming in from London, even though none of the voting will be counted until tomorrow. This is now not hard news, not fact, but rumour and gossip from those people who are activists on the ground. But the exciting and the interesting thing is news of a huge turnout. Now, initially we were hearing big turnouts in outer London. This is the area of London that Boris Johnson needs, the Ken-hating part of London, the driving part of London. Huge turnouts, and we mean huge, David. In certain areas, Bexley, I was told, for example, higher than at a general election, for example. But then the news came that there was a very high turnout in inner London as well, the Ken-loving part of London in general. Now, this suggests that there's been real motivation on both parties' part, and therefore makes the result incredibly difficult to call, though some Tories, perhaps unwisely, have already called it for their man Boris Johnson.
OK, I love the caveats you put into all this. Tony King, what are you going to be looking at tonight especially?
Well, I'm going to be
read
looking
into these results,
especially at life outside London. I think some people need a reminder that there is life outside London. Of all the people who live in the UK, 3/4 of them live in England or Wales outside London. And they're going to be very interested in tonight's results. What are we going to be looking for? Quite simply, whether Labour is going to be as badly hit as everybody thinks it's going to be, including people on the Labour side. And as you said a moment ago, whether the Conservatives have got the kind of momentum that they need to have now if they're to win in what is probably going to be a couple of years' time.
OK, and we have to remember, of course, we're comparing this with a very bad year for Labour, which was 2004, and a very good year for the Tories. Jeremy, just give us the general picture of how things, what we're going to be examining.
David, let's take a look at the map, because that's a great place to start, and just see the layout. As you say, England and Wales is where these elections are being held, and this is the terrain, the raised grey bits apart, so where these councils are actually being elected, 159 of them in total, including all 22 of the councils in Wales here. But you notice a lot of space, the light blue on the map. And if that's you watching at home, you're thinking, why didn't I have a vote today? It may well be, if you're down to the southwest, for example, there wasn't a lot of electing going on down there, just Exeter and Plymouth. So quite a lot of space on the map, places where there wasn't anyone voting. This is the map as it was constituted going into this election. The blue, obviously Conservative, red Labour, yellow is Lib Dem, white is hung councils, and that's Plaid Cymru there in Wales in green. And we'll be taking a look at some of the individual councils as we go on through the night. But I think, if I can, it just might be worth having a look at the polls and the way that they told the story of Mr Brown's premiership since he took over. Let's just take a look back, if we can, to what the polls were doing in May last year, when Mr Blair was in his final moments as Prime Minister. And I'll bring it up here, and you'll see that we have a situation here where the Conservatives are ahead, but not by much. 36 plays 33. And then that Brown bounce that everyone talked about at the time seems slightly like a distant memory now, but 39% to Labour as Brown took over. And then things started, as we mentioned, to go wrong. And you can see the polls gradually turning against Mr Brown. And you watch this sequence here of the Conservatives starting to lock in quite a handy lead from their point of view. And basically, that stays in place. We end up with 40, 30 and 18 to the Lib Dems. And the big question tonight is whether the real votes, it's such a relief to have real votes to count here, the real votes actually underline what the polls have been telling us since Mr Brown's premiership began to go, in the words of his critics, slightly awry. Back to our map then, just to look at some specific areas that we'll be focusing on. Of course, I know you'll be saying this in the studio, local elections, local stories. Not all voting happens on a national basis, and there are particularities in councils that we'll be looking at which make them interesting, but also we'll have national resonance as well. We've chosen 11 to bring out to you. We've chosen, for example, here, Caerphilly, which is Labour, but a very small swing to Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists. About 2% would take that council away from Labour. If you're interested in how the Lib Dems and the Conservatives are doing, you mentioned Nick Clegg, David, but the Clegg-Cameron tussle will be highlighted in Cheltenham, because that's hung at the moment. They're absolutely level. 6% will give it, a 6% swing to the Conservatives will give them the council. What else? Reading. Labour since 1986, and a very rare dot of red there in southeast England. 4% swing would take that council away from Labour. And also down here in the southeast is Thurrock. Interestingly, Thurrock had been Labour, had been Conservative, and then rather against the trend, the Conservatives lost it last year. They need a tiny swing to get Thurrock back, so we'll watch that. And then right up here in the northeast, Conservatives would love to get North Tyneside, because they're always being told they don't have enough councillors in certain areas. This is outside their comfort zone. They need 2% swing for that council, although it does still have a Labour mayor. So that's the map. We'll come back to it again and again, I know. David.
Great. Now, Tess Sajal, do you have a sense of foreboding, as many commentators say you probably do as you go into this evening and these results?
I don't have a sense of foreboding, no. I think it's important that we wait and see what the results actually are. And, you know, having
That wouldn't stop you having a sense of foreboding?
No. But
with respect?
I think that, you know, all the indications are that this is likely to be tough. But I think that one of the things, you know, if you've fought, I mean, I fought an enormous number of election campaigns, as many of my colleagues are, and you find that when you have the benefit of actually going out and talking to people, being out there on the streets, knocking on people's doors and so forth, you know, you get a much more measured view of the world than sitting in a studio like this or, you know, within half a mile of this studio
Not
in
sure
the
what
Westminster
that means.
Village.
You mean Labour's
Well, what I
doing
mean
better
is,
out there than the commentators say they are?
I don't think it's as bad for us as
right.
many of the commentators suggest. Having said that, you know, I'm not predicting that tonight is going to be easy for us. I mean, most of my time over the last 2 months has been spent in London helping to organise Ken Livingstone's campaign.
Yeah, 2004 was so bad for you, though. It can't get worse than that, can it?
Well, let's see by the end of tonight.
So you're not optimistic of
I'm
gains?
just simply at the beginning of the evening, with one council declared, I have an open mind, and you know, I don't think any of us can preempt the results.
You got 40%, George Osborne, as the Tories on the national share in the last election last year. People say you've got to do better than that to show that you've got momentum. Do you expect to do better than that tonight?
Well, 40% would be good, and you know, we'll wait and see what happens. I mean, actually, when these councils were fought 4 years ago, we only got 37%. So obviously, we want to make an advance on that. And this is, you know, as Conservatives, we want to demonstrate that we can govern locally, that the change we can bring to local councils is also going to be a change we can bring nationally. And so I'm also going to be looking at councils like Birmingham, where, for example, the Conservatives have run a very successful administration, led a very successful administration, and got one of the lowest council taxes, but also improved the quality of the council. Or Kirklees up in West Yorkshire, which won Council of the Year, now a Conservative council. So it's, you know, these are important locally, but obviously nationally we want to do well. And of course, this is a huge test for Gordon Brown. This is not mid-term in the classic sense.
Are you saying it's more of a test for Gordon Brown than it is for David Cameron?
Well, I think we have to demonstrate, but we want to demonstrate steady progress and momentum, as you put it. But these are also the first elections that Gordon Brown has fought as Prime Minister. So they're not mid-term in the classic sense. Labour has, you know, done their big gamble of the Parliament. They've changed their leader without even having a leadership election, certainly without having a general election, and we will see how he does. But, you know, we are aware that we are fighting off a very high base.
Charles Kennedy, you did better than any other Liberal Democrat leader, didn't you, in local elections?
Did I?
Yeah, didn't you? Very kind of
you to blow my own trumpet.
Happens to be true. You got 29%,
Yeah.
the highest popular vote ever in local elections. Do you think Clegg will do as well as that tonight?
It is not impossible, because Labour, I think, are in very great difficulty. I mean, we did, in these equivalent elections last time around, Labour dropped to third place in share of the popular vote. I don't think that had ever happened before. When George, if I can just add to his account there, big cities that we're running like Newcastle, Liverpool and so on, and Birmingham, and great advances being made in Birmingham, not just, I'm sure you'll acknowledge, due to the Conservatives.
In partnership with the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much, yes. So, you know...
I did say
the question was whether Clegg will do. The question was whether Clegg will do as well as you did.
I think that we can be in for a solid performance tonight. You have to remember, 4 years ago, when I was leader of these equivalent elections, it was the height of the Iraq controversy, the absence of weapons of mass destruction, which cast a massive shadow, maybe to a slightly unhealthy effect, over localised elections, although we were significant beneficiaries. I think the other thing is, I mean, there will be inevitably be a lot of talk about the leaders. Nick has only been in the job a matter of weeks. David Cameron will be measured in terms of how the Conservatives do. Obviously, Gordon Brown is being roasted on the spit by many commentators and by some of his own people at the moment, and if it's a bad night, that will add to that sense. I don't think it's quite such a barometer in terms of our own leadership, to be honest. I don't think you can read across to quite that extent.
We'll come back. You have lots more time to talk, but we'll go around the country a bit. Let's join Michael Crick, who's in Bury. Now, Bury in Greater Manchester, which is one of the places that the Tories are hoping to take from no overall control. Important sign, if they do, that they're making headway in the north. You have any idea how it's gone, Michael?
Well, no, not yet. Things are rather slow here. Bury, of course, is the home of the famous Bury Black Pudding, and I've taken the opportunity to stock up, and it was the birthplace of Sir Robert Peel. And now it's really the big target for the Tories in the northwest, which they sort of, in a way, hope if they're successful tonight, it'll act as a bridgehead for further gains at the parliamentary level in the next election in the northwest. Now, you talk to Labour people here tonight, they're saying, look, it's not going to be a great night for Labour. On the other hand, it's not meltdown either, although other sources in the Labour camp are saying they may be in trouble in one of their safe wards, not just the wards that have been targeted by the Conservatives. I spoke to voters at polling stations this afternoon and this evening, trying to find out why they were voting the way they were, why some of them weren't voting Labour anymore. There was a lot of mention of the 10p tax rate, as you might expect, Gordon Brown's performance, and I think for the first time in an election, perhaps in 6 years now, nobody to me mentioned the war. So it looks like the war is finally fading as an election issue, but there was a whole range of other grumbles. But I wasn't entirely convinced that the grumbling, the defection, was going to the Conservative Party. There weren't that many new Conservatives to me. Some of them were going to the BNP, some of them, of course, will have abstained, some to the Lib Dems.
OK, thanks very much, Michael. We'll be back with you later on. The whole of Wales, or every voter in Wales who was registered and wanted to vote, was able to vote today. And Betson Powys is down there in Wales. Betson, what are you looking out for tonight?
Well, certainly yes, there is life outside London, as I heard somebody mention earlier. And there certainly would be quite a lot of life here in the Vale of Glamorgan if a whole load of postal votes hadn't been handed in at the polling stations fairly late in the day today. So things starting fairly slowly. But there are plenty of questions here in Wales as well. One fairly obvious one for Welsh Labour, and I don't incidentally think they know the answer yet, which is quite simply, if there is a big anti-Labour swing, does Rhodri Morgan's Labour feel the full force of it, or might they just weather the storm? They only hold 7 of the 22 councils here outright as it is. If you start hearing about Flintshire, Newport, Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly, those sorts of places falling to no overall control, then they're not having a good night of it. The Lib Dems here, well, they did well 4 years ago. They'll do well, therefore, to hang on to what they've got. Now then, the Conservatives, the Tory story, well, it is happening here in Barry, in the Vale of Glamorgan. The kind of straightforward Conservative Labour pitch battle, the kind of council they should be taking with ease at this sort of time. Now, they're quietly confident, but you do get the feeling that if Labour go down, it'll be with a fight. Now, that leaves the fourth big party here in Wales, Plaid Cymru, in national government now, of course, in coalition with Labour. Now, how has that been playing on their doorsteps? Might they pay a price for that? Now, there are stories coming from Gwynedd, the council that they do hold outright now, their heartland really, that there might be a few scalps being taken in Gwynedd. Plaid Cymru will cheer themselves if they do well and pick up some ground elsewhere and prove that they deserve that relatively new name of theirs, Plaid, the Party of Wales.
Betson, thank you very much indeed. We're getting the first news from we look at key wards across the country and measure how people are voting between the three parties, as well as giving the results council by council. And we've got a number of those in, and the message so far is it's looking good for the Tories tonight, looking bad for the Liberal Democrats, and Labour at best the same as it was in 2004, so not much change, 2004 and 2007. Tony.
The Bury result that Michael Crick was talking about is really very significant indeed. The best polls for the Tories at the moment are showing a swing to the Tories since the last general election, approaching 10%. To take Bury, they need a swing only of about 5 or 6%. If they don't do that, one will really begin to wonder whether the polls are being accurate, since this is a pretty typical sort of place that the Tories have to win. If they do take it, that'll be a very good sign, not only for tonight, but probably for the next few months possibly the next couple of years.
Those signs from the boffins behind the scenes about the early wards in, David, are interesting because it confirms what we all know, which is it's going to be a poor night for Labour. The question was, how poor? Now, if it's around about what it was a year ago, around about what it was 4 years ago, they will say, well, look, we went on and won a general election with Tony Blair in 2005 after a poor local election performance. Their critics, of course, their enemies will say, hold on, you've changed leader, you talked of renewing, you should be doing a much better than that. Nick Clegg will have, if this turns out to be right, a slightly harder story to tell, which is it will look as though he's going backwards, and I suspect they will look for any individual council they can point to that demonstrates some sort of progress. So the measure of how you judge success is going to be terribly important. Are you judging against last year when Tony Blair was unpopular, 4 years ago when he was massively unpopular because of the Iraq War, or against some sort of baseline expectation of what Gordon Brown as a new leader ought to be doing?
OK, let's go down to City Hall and join Emily Maitlis.
Hi, David. Yes, today being election day is normally a politics-free zone, but not in the world of blogging. All afternoon, those political animals have been at it like, well, bloggers. And I'm going to bring you some of their Twitter, their chatter, their marginals, their finds, all the little eccentricities of the blogging world in just a second. But first, let me introduce them. In the blue corner, Iain Dale is the publisher of the monthly magazine Total Politics, and he is one of Britain's best-known political bloggers. Describing herself as a liberal civilian with a social conscience, Alix Mortimer's blog slogan is tea, idleness, liberalism and wine, a welcome addition to the online Lib Dem community. Luke Akehurst has been a Labour councillor in Hackney, East London, since 2002 and says his ambition is to be Chief Whip in an 8th-term Labour government. Luke, before we get to that 8th-term Labour government, just tell us about your experiences today. You had a mayoral candidate inside your very home.
Yeah, I had Ken Livingstone round at my house with Diane Abbott and our local London Assembly member.
What was he doing there, Luke? You have to tell us.
Well, what he was doing in practice was going for a quick toilet break before he went out to go door to door in all the shops and cafes along Stoke Newington High Street.
I hope you have one of those little blue plaques on your roof now.
Maybe.
And your activism is very much getting the mayoral.
Yeah, I've had a busy day running a campaign headquarters for Hackney North, which is a kind of core Labour area, and we think we did pretty well in getting our vote out there in an area that historically would be a rather low turnout area.
OK, Luke, thanks very much. I'm going to rudely miss out Alix for a second. Iain, I want your 3 best facts of the night.
Well, the most interesting one so far is from the Conservative Home blog, who've called the London mayoral election for Boris Johnson. Now, they've really got their finger on the pulse of the Conservative Party. They've had Conservative activists contact them all day. And there's a particularly high turnout in the sort of the outer boroughs around London, which are all Tory areas, which didn't turn out for Steve Norris in 2004. Phil Hendren on the Dizzy Thinks blog, he reckons there's a 70% turnout in London, which is unheard of in these sort of elections.
So what kind of things are we hearing about? Seats, councils, anything there?
Well,
less sexy perhaps, but still relevant to their big night.
My first result tonight was from Swansea, with the Conservative gain. There's another one in Chorley in the north. Obviously, the Conservatives want to do well in the north tonight, so any gains in the north of England, they're going to pour over. But the national vote share is what everybody's looking at. Labour are saying that the Conservatives need to get 47%, which of course is a joke, they're just spinning that. We're looking at, I think, 41, 42%.
OK, Alix, some interesting stuff's come to light on Boris.
Yes, I've been wondering about this. I wrote about this morning on my blog. Apparently there's a story in the Times this morning. Boris is apparently going to stay on as MP for Henley if he becomes Mayor of London. Now, Iain, my top source here, has just told me that's rubbish. So I'm kind of interested in where that story's come from and what he thinks he's doing, if there's any truth in it. Because if you're Mayor of London...
It's a bit odd if you're sitting around.
It's a little bit
Henley.
odd, yeah.
All right, thanks very much. I should tell you, behind their cool exteriors, there are beating hearts of passion, and they are promising they are going to get the results before you do, David. Let me just bring you our web pages here. This is Iain Dale's diary. Luke's blog we can go to as well. I'm going to pull us back to this one. A rather attractive picture of me, I think you'll all agree. And we'd very much like you to get in touch with us, bbc.co.uk/election, to give us your thoughts, your Twitter, my new word. And before we go, I'll just tell you that our next guest, come back to us quickly, is one dead ringer, John Culshaw, who will be talking to us over here at the bar with Clemency Burton-Hill. And there's your man, there's your man. We'll be talking to him in just a few moments when he will be taking us through all the politicians he musters.
Iain Dale says that the Liberal Democrats have taken control of Hull on his blog, and Liverpool is a key place where the Liberal Democrats have been in a bit of trouble because the Audit Commission said they were doing very badly on the financial front, and they're desperate to hold on to Liverpool, one of their key cities. David Woodthorpe is there. Do you have any indication, David, what's happening up there?
Well, if you talk to Joe Anderson, who's the leader of the Labour group here, he's still bullishly saying that they will take Liverpool into no overall control. And that means picking up about 6 seats based on the way people were originally elected. There have been some defectors in the last year. If you talk to Lib Dem activists as they've been coming in, they've been saying, look, we think there's going to be a very low turnout. We think Labour vote isn't getting out at all. We don't think there is the anger on the streets. And they actually rather jokingly refer to Gordon Brown being the best canvasser for the Lib Dems. So they're backing Gordon because they claim he's getting Lib Dem votes coming their way.
Well, thanks very much. We'll be back up there. Let's have a look, though, with Jeremy at these first key wards that have come in, Jeremy, and the change that they're showing. And then perhaps our three politicians would like to comment on what we've gleaned so far. Small crumbs, but a bit anyway. Jeremy.
Tiny crumbs really from us, because our key wards, roughly 950, nearly 1,000 wards, and we're looking at them as they come in order to give us some idea of how this local election would play across the country if it had been held in that way with everyone voting. So let's just see what's happened so far. How many of our key wards? Well, only 10% so far, but that is 208,000 people's votes have been counted, and I'm going to show you now the change on last time these seats were contested, mainly 2004, of course. Let's have a look. So we start with Labour here, and they're down 3% just on these early counts, 3% down. Conservatives are up 6%. Want to hear George Osborne's reaction to that? Don't know if that'll be sustained through the night, but let's see. Lib Dems are down 4%, and then let's have a look just at others, not really shifting very much. So far, early days, that's what we got.
Well, thanks very much, Jeremy. Well, Charles Kennedy, it's not looking too hot, is it, for Liberal Democrats on those figures?
Well, I think that the thing here is, I mean, first of all, you take this Hull result. I know this isn't absolutely confirmed, but with a local defection there last year, if we retook one ward, we're back in overall control of Hull. Now, if it's the case we've taken 5, and that will be at Labour's expense, that is quite significant. I think also in Liverpool, I'm just looking at the figures here, it's 47 Lib Dem wards at the moment, 35 Labour. You've also got a couple of vacancies. You've got 4 Liberals and some others, 1 Independent and so on. I would think, and it's early to say yet, but judging by what our people there are saying, we will still, I think, certainly be probably the largest party in Liverpool, and therefore in effective control of Liverpool by all said and done. So, you know, in what are more testing elections in some of these places for us, so far, so good.
Well, of course, 2004 was a good year for you.
Yeah.
It was a bad year for Labour, Tessa Giles. So for Labour to be showing signs of it being even worse must be pretty dismal.
Well, let's see if that's borne out through the night. And let's also bear in mind, and I suspect that people watching at home will say this as well, that you can't just assume that individual local results are driven solely by national trends and national issues. You know, we've all come here with our particular briefings on particular councils, and you know, it isn't clear cut. I mean, I'm not for one moment denying the extent to which, you know, some people will be registering a protest against the government, or actually some people may be standing up for the government in a difficult time through the way they voted in the local elections. But these are local elections, and there's a limit to how far you can generalise from the local election to a likely general election result. And I think, and Tony will correct me if I'm wrong, I think actually in order to find a relationship between what people said at local elections, you've got to go back to 1995 when we were on 47% of the vote. We then went on 2 years later to win the general election. In 2004, yes, we had a very bad year, but we went on the next year to win the general election. So what I think it's important to do is just to separate out the relationship between how people express their views and vote in local elections and the difference between that and a general election.
There must be,
and this is not a general election.
No, nobody's pretending it's a general election, but it is a kind of indication with real voting about the feeling in the country. And you're one of the people who've been warning that Labour will lose the election if it goes on opposing itself, if people go on complaining. You talked about them, if we fight like ferrets in a sack, I think was your rather vivid description,
yes,
which is presumably what you think is happening at the moment, or you wouldn't have used the word.
And this is not a new political lesson. That divided parties.
You think it is a divided party?
I don't think we are a divided party, and I think that
Why
very
do you
often.
say it then?
Well, because I think that the important thing is that we have a very clear idea of what the country wants of us, and that in government we work to meet the country's expectations of us.
And all this sniping at Brown and the fuss over the 10p rate, the revolt that didn't quite happen over that, the remarks by Mandelson, Charles Clarke, Lord Levy, Lord Desai, all of that doesn't mean the party's in any way in trouble. I mean, nobody's doing that in the Tory party.
Well, I think if you take the government and you take the people who are central to making government work and making the government work for the people of this country, because after all, I mean, that's the most, that's the whole, purpose of our existence. I think that there is extraordinary unity in the government and a sense of common purpose. Okay. And I think that a willingness to debate is different from division, and there are not divisions in the Labour Party such as those that characterised the Tory party throughout the late 80s and into the 90s.
Maybe that's just because you don't have anybody ready to take over the leadership from Gordon Brown and challenge for it.
No, that is absolutely not right. I mean, there is broad consensus in the Labour Party that New Labour, that being able to attract support from a very wide range of people in different parts of the country, occupying the centre ground. That is the consensus that British people want.
And I said some people will be crowing and some people were defending their position. Are you crowing over a 6-point improvement on 2004 for the Tories, George Osborne?
Well, I mean, obviously, if that was borne out through the night, that'd be very good for us. I'm also hearing we're actually gaining council seats in places like Sunderland in the northeast, gaining in places like Halton near my constituency in the northwest of England, as well as gaining seats in Witney, which might be expected due to the local MP being David Cameron. But we are gaining, and that's what I like about this, is that there are actually Conservative councillors being elected and Conservative councils able to deliver Conservative policies on the ground.
Want to have a look at Worcester, which you hope to take, a hung council? Stays the same, Conservative 17, Labour on 13, no change. Liberal Democrats on 3. Slight disappointment.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of...
Yes, intrude.
Intrude.
That's
an astonishing result, yes. I must say. That was one that I thought was absolutely certain to go to the Conservatives.
Why?
Because they were only 1 seat short. They controlled it until recently. They lost it in a by-election, amazingly, last autumn. And I thought this was simply going to be a walkover for the Tories. I was very startled.
And what's more, I think in a sense it helps us work through what Tessa Jowell was saying. She's clearly right that these are not national elections. Why they matter nationally is not just because we can project a national vote share, but we can look at individual areas and say, is this the building block to national parliamentary success? Now, in that case, it clearly isn't. The Tories should be winning a council like that in order to win that seat, in order to notch up at least one on that massive mountain that they have to go up in order to get
on that point, hold on, let's look at this one too, Tunbridge Wells. Now, Tunbridge Wells is a Tory Liberal Democrat battleground. The Conservatives have got a huge majority on the council, but the Liberal Democrats overall lose 3 and the Tories gain 3. So is that a bit disturbing for the Liberal Democrats?
Well, yes and no, because in a way they're never going to win the seat. So the key thing is winning where it matters, not amassing seats or indeed votes where it doesn't matter.
But Tunbridge Wells, does it not matter how the Liberal Democrats do against the Tories in southern England? Because that's what Tunbridge Wells is.
Well, I think there's a fair point, because I think it's the perception of the individual seat. I mean, the figures that you're looking at, the backdrop to this is, you know, an overwhelming Conservative majority. What will be more significant is if you look at perhaps Somerset, what might happen in the council there over the course of the next day, where it's quite finely balanced.
We haven't got much in the West Country at all, have we, in these elections, in fact?
Not much, but I mean, so Somerset will be, you know, something of a potentially significant straw in the wind. And there, of course, it's much more evenly matched. That will tell you more, because people know either side could win, which I suspect, obviously, looking at those figures, ain't the perception in Tunbridge Wells.
I think there is a point about controlling local councils. I mean, one of the things that the Conservatives have managed to do in the last few years is take control in areas where there are Labour MPs. And you can go to some parts of the country now where almost every councillor is a Conservative, but the MP is still Labour. So, in fact, the first result tonight was Tamworth, and we're talking about, you know, the Conservatives have gained a seat and we controlled Tamworth Council. Tamworth still has a Labour MP. So I remember. I remember when I was here in the 1990s. In fact, I was the researcher passing the notes in and so on. And we saw Conservative seats with Conservative MPs lose their councils to the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, and then, of course, at the subsequent general election, the seats themselves fall. And it's not just because of the, you know, they indicate something about a national vote. It's also locally, you then have, if you're the Labour MP, no support on the ground. The council is Conservative, it's working with...
But it's not entirely true, because you have some places where traditionally you have one party in control of the council and the other person is an MP elected regularly, don't you? There are a lot of places like that.
Well, yeah, although at general elections they tend to sort of reset.
OK. We'll come back here to this very interesting bit, but we'll go to Jeremy Vine first. Jeremy.
Well, David, George Osborne will recognise this place. It's the frozen area where the Conservatives have been for so many years, out of government. And here on the wall, as the chill wind blows through the studio, I can see the pictures of the ascent of man, that story of human evolution from the crouching ape right through to Homo erectus, standing tall and proud. And we're going to ask whether the Conservative ascent could be completed tonight. But let's go back, first of all, to, well, almost the year that Mr. Osborne mentioned, 1996. There we are. John Major, let's go back a year before that, 95, 26%. And there he is, really stooping, knuckle-dragging, poor performance in those local elections. So a long way to go for the Conservative Party. Watch what happened next. Who came next? 1998, it was William Hague, and doing better in those local elections with 33%, but still serious orthopaedic problems there. The guy's in need of a back massage of some kind. Who came next in 2002? Ian Duncan Smith, 35%. You can see the progression, you can see the party gradually straightening up and walking tall, but of course still nowhere near winning a general election. Michael Howard thought he might. 2004, 38% in the local elections there, and almost straight, but not quite, just still stooping, still a little bit uncomfortable in his posture. So then we move to David Cameron, 40% 2 years running. And this now is the test, isn't it, for Mr. Cameron? Can he remain tall, upright, and in a position where he might think about winning a general election? Can he stay as Tory electus any lower than 40? And it will look as if his whole party is moving backwards. Back to you.
Well, let's now just do what we'll do once or twice in the evening and look at the results in more detail from the experts in the area where you're watching. And off they go. Now, we've got news from Cheltenham, you have, yes? You think the Liberal Democrats are doing well in Cheltenham?
Yeah, what you said at the top of the programme about Cheltenham was this was an example, obviously, of a much more finely balanced contest, head-to-head, Conservatives and ourselves. And we're making gains at the Conservatives' expense there. That is significant. And, of course, that, going back to what George was fairly saying a moment ago, Cheltenham, of course, an example where we also hold the parliamentary seat. So if there's a degree of read across there, that's encouraging. And I gather
Hull has been taken.
And I gather Hull, it's just come up now.
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
So we've regained Hull. So, you know, early omens, I think, pretty good. Pretty good.
OK.
Yes, although we've got news that we've taken West Lindsey Council from the Liberal Democrats, also Harlow, we've taken control of that. It's an absolutely crucial seat for us in the general election, currently held by Labour. So there's and 2 seats in Wigan, which is good news as well.
Right.
The road to
Hull,
Wigan
let's
Pier.
just have a look at Hull, and this is how Liberal Democrats took it back.
Yeah,
up
so
5.
it was 5.
And Labour overall down 1. Others fell by 4.
So the nostalgic Prescott factor didn't work its magic. Amazing.
It is an interesting sign, those results that we're getting in the South, because the assumption, I think, of many Liberal Democrats in Charles's party was that there would be a retreat from the South, that they would start to lose in the South to the Tories. The Tories would get many of those seats back that Margaret Thatcher used to hold, that John Major did. Now, we've just heard 2, Cheltenham, Worcester, in which the Tories are not making the sort of advances they would want to make there. Now, they may make advances all sorts of other places, but the way these results will be analysed, not tonight, but in a day or two by the party analysts, is seat by seat, saying, are we doing enough to gain that particular constituency?
But it's interesting because we've had the Liberal, the raw figure or the analysis giving Liberal Democrats looking as if they were doing worse than 2004, and yet the results are coming through better so far, what we've had.
Yes, and remember that odd things can happen. It can take a lot of votes, for example, to win maybe 1 ward in a big city.
Yeah.
A very few votes lost, and you might lose 2 or 3 wards in a shire district. So the total number of votes may not be the most important guide. It's an important guide, but not the most important necessarily.
Right. Well, I tried to break this programme up and let you, wherever you are in the country, hear from your own specialist political reporters a moment ago, but it didn't actually work. So I'm going to try again. So goodbye, and you'll join us again in a couple of minutes. Tony.
I was just going to say, I know that Tessa Child doesn't think she needs to.
It's taken on a kind of national status, certainly a national significance, a race now of personalities, not just of parties. But what about the wider effects they're having on the confidence of the parties overall? Let's talk to Michael Portillo, Polly Toynbee and Tony Travers about that now. Michael, Boris has become sort of totemic for the Tories, hasn't he? If he doesn't win, it does suggest that the Tories haven't really picked up.
The Tories want to do very well in London. They need to win. But it's very, very curious because, of course, they're backing a candidate who is in many ways an embarrassment to them. I mean, if Boris wins tonight, then the Tories are going to be holding their breath for the next 2 years.
Do you still think that? I mean, that was always the joke, wasn't it? The only people who feared him more than Labour MPs was Tory MPs. Do you think that still stands?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Tories have made a very good fist during the election of pretending that, everything's all right with Boris. But this is the man that David Cameron sacked from the shadow cabinet. The man who's made any number of gaffes. I mean, this was by no means their first choice of candidate. So, they will still be wondering what's going to happen if Boris wins tonight. Nonetheless, they absolutely need to win. It's a curious election when the Conservatives desperate to win with a candidate who embarrasses them, Labour desperate to win with a candidate who horrifies them.
Yeah, Polly, that's the point, isn't it, Polly Toynbee, that in essence we've seen the photo ops with Gordon Brown and Ken over the last few days, but we know there's a deep unease between those two men.
Oh, astonishing. I mean, terrible blood battles, particularly over the Tube and the PPP. I mean, they really, really hated each other. Brown refused to meet Ken at all over that time. Now they need each other. They're bound together. And Ken has been glad to have Brown around campaigning with him. Whether it's a good idea or not, I'm not sure. And on the other hand, he's very afraid that maybe he'll go down because Labour goes down rather than his own popularity.
So that's the point. If Ken doesn't get it, is that the beginning of the end of Brown? Is that the start of the sinking ship?
I don't think so. It's a long time to an election. If you think 4 years ago, Labour only got 26%, came third, and then a year later won an election. So there's not necessarily a connection.
Tony Travers, which way round do you think it's worked? Has London influenced the wider national politics, or has the party's position influenced what we're seeing in the mayoral race?
I think there's no getting away from the fact that the national position of Labour, its terrible position in the polls, is a drag on Ken Livingstone. And Ken Livingstone is almost the ultimate national or non-national but visible political brand in local or regional politics. And he can hold out for a long way against an unpopular party. And if he did that, then he would become an influence on national politics. because he'd have given Gordon Brown something that Gordon Brown can't get anywhere else, which is winning in elections.
There are people now starting to talk about this sort of divine right of Ken, if you like. This idea that because he's the incumbent and because there's no limit on how many times he can stand, it looks like he's not going. It's making people nervous. Do you think that might be creating a shift away?
It's a powerful argument, and there's no question that the British, for good reasons, don't like powerful political leaders who hang around too long. On the other hand, as we've just heard from Michael, the Conservatives have gone on with a challenging candidate in their own terms, and as Ken is already worth a few points, you add the two together, and it could actually give the Labour Party in London a better chance than they ever hoped for, given the position they're in, and that's why it's been such a difficult race to work out precisely what the result would be.
OK, thanks all. Of course, we haven't got on to second preference, which could have a big influence on this one, but we will wait a whole 24 hours, well, just under, to bring you that result.
So we've had results from Hull and from West Lindsey. We'll go over to Tim Iredale, I think, in Lincoln to hear about those. Tim. Where is Tim? Where is West Lindsey? We don't have Hull. We've lost it. OK. Let's just see these results then. West Lindsey, this is a Conservative gain from the Liberal Democrats. Up 4 for the Tories, down 4 for the Liberal Democrats. And the Hull result, a Liberal Democrat gain, or you may call it not a gain because they held it before, but they just lost it a little bit back. But they've done well there because they've gained 5 seats. They only need to gain 1, isn't that right, Charles, to take it back, I think?
One would have taken it back from a defection last week.
Yes.
5 is obviously very good indeed.
Yes, and we've got Knowsley, Labour hold on there, and Labour down 3, the Liberal Democrats up 3, and that's up in Knowsley, Metropolitan District. Sunderland, the story in Sunderland, the Conservatives gain 5. This is real serious Labour heartland territory. Labour down 5 councillors, the Conservatives up overall 5, so that will warm the hearts of the Tories. Tameside in Manchester, Labour hold on to this. Again, a slight drop in Labour representation, slight increase in the Tories, 1 down for the Liberal Democrats. Great Yarmouth, Conservatives hold on to that council. They're up 2 at the expense of Labour. Great Yarmouth on the Norfolk coast. George.
Can I just say something about the Sunderland result and the Tameside result in Greater Manchester?
Anything you like.
Which is that there is always this argument put to me that the Conservatives can't win in the north. There's Sunderland in the northeast of England. There's Tameside in Greater Manchester, where we've gained seats off Labour. And indeed, if you now look across the north, we're doing extremely well. And there are more councils now with no Labour representation at all than there are Conservative councils with no Conservative representation. So I think that is a very good sign that we're winning in places like Sunderland. And we actually took our spring conference to Gateshead and had a great conference up in the northeast of England just a couple of months ago.
OK. Jeremy, are you there and do you have something for us?
We are here and we have something for you. How about that? And it's something for you to get your teeth into in the studio, because this is a poll that we've done with ICM. And this is the question, the overarching question: which of the following statements apply to Labour, Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats? And I'll give you the statements one at a time. What I'm going to do actually is show you the results from last year, so you've got a bit of comparison here. It really makes very interesting reading this. The first one was, can be trusted to run Britain's economy. So which of the parties can be? We asked the pollees. Let's have a look at the results in 2007, first of all. 48% said Labour, 46 Conservatives, 33 for the Lib Dems. So Labour still ahead of the Conservatives last year. Move it on a year to this year, and look, a very sharp fall for Labour there, and the Conservatives, who've also fallen, maybe because of general economic woe, but they have pulled past Labour, and Lib Dems quite a way down as well. So that's the economy. Next question was this: which party has a good team of leaders? Let's look at 2007 again. Here we go. And Let's see what happens. 43% Labour, 2007, 36% Conservative, 32% Liberal Democrat. That was obviously under the Blair leadership. What happened when we pulled it forward to the Brown premiership? Drops very substantially there. And in fact, you see now the Conservatives coming up past Labour in that question as well. So in the economy and the good team of leaders, Conservatives now ahead of Labour, although looking at these numbers dropping as well. Lib Dems, again, dropping worryingly, quite substantially there from their point of view. OK, next question was this. Let's just take a look at it. And again, we asked Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dems, which of them is a divided party? Which is divided? In 2007, we got these answers. Quite a lot of people thought Labour were divided in 2007. 64%, nearly two-thirds. 36% said Conservatives and 25% said Lib Dems. Spin forwards and, well, Labour look a bit less divided now. Can have a chat about that in the studio. Conservatives a bit less divided now and Lib Dems roughly where they were a year ago. So, next question we asked was this, and it was on the NHS. Again, with reference to a question last year. We've been asking these questions since 2002, by the way, so it's not just these 2 years. 2007, what were the answers? 30% Labour, 36% Conservative, 38% Lib Dems. And the significance for us last year when we talked about this poll was that the Conservatives had pulled substantially past the Labour Party in that particular poll last year on that question. Watch what happens now if I show you the answers this year. Labour are up a little bit on the NHS. The Conservatives are down. They've fallen now behind Labour and the Lib Dems. Also, for Charles Kennedy in the studio, some worrying figures on the Lib Dems side, some quite sharp drops there. OK, another question for you in our BBC ICM analysis poll, and this was one that has a bearing on the whole 10p tax mess, so we only asked it this year. Which is the party that has the right policies for those on a low income? Which parties have you? You can choose more than one party if you're being asked the question. Here we go with the answer. 29% Labour, 24% Conservative and 24% Lib Dems. So Labour, whatever has gone wrong on that whole issue, can at least say they have not been eclipsed on the whole poverty agenda by the opposition. Right, we ask now about individuals. Are the following politicians an asset or a liability? And we have three for you. Let's do the Prime Minister first of all. Gordon Brown, asset or liability? Let's have a look at the statistic for Gordon Brown. 42% said asset and 52% said liability, so substantially more people thinking Mr Brown doing more harm than good for his party. Next one is, have a guess, Tony Blair. We thought we'd put him into this to get a comparison out. Asset or liability for his party? 47-47, so a better score than the man who followed him. And our following politician here, and the last question, by the way, for you at the moment, David Cameron. Asset or liability? Watch this one. This is interesting. 68% asset and 24% liability. So if you're Mr Cameron looking at just your own personal leadership position, that is very good news. That's our poll. David?
We'll talk about that with the politicians in just a moment. But first, let's go to Nuneaton and join Joan Cummings, who has news from there. Joan.
Yes, David. What's happened here is that we've had history made. Labour were in charge for 34 years. Tonight, they've lost control. Nuneaton and Bedworth has turned blue. The Conservatives have got the gains that they wanted, and they have taken control of this traditional Labour stronghold. I have to also say that BMP, who canvassed 12 candidates, also gained 2 seats tonight. And the feeling here is that this is a tide turning. I spoke to the Conservative leader, who is now obviously also going to be the leader of the council, and he said that people were basically just tired of what was going on in London. They wanted a change, and they were also tired of what was going on in their doorsteps. And he felt that they were representing a fresh change. And indeed, that's what's happened. The Labour leader is now the leader of the opposition. And as I said, after 34 years, Nuneaton and Bedworth Council is under Conservative control.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, this is, I think very clearly, I mean, that Nuneaton is a council that has been Labour for a very long time. It took a change of 3 seats to lose to lose overall control. I mean, to what extent this has been determined by a national trend as opposed to local factors, I think is difficult to determine.
Is
and I think
a badly run council by Labour? It's been Labour since the 70s, hasn't it?
It's been a Labour council for a very long time. Yes.
You were making the distinction earlier in this programme about feelings about the government and Gordon Brown as opposed to what happened locally, and were warning that it was what happened locally was just as important. You're saying in Nuneaton this was a Labour Party that let you down by running the place badly and so lost it, or is it because of Number 10?
David, I don't know how people who live in Nuneaton experiences the services of the local council, but I think whether you have the sort of, that sort of incumbency for 34 years can, give rise to a sense that the council is complacent and so forth. I mean, it's, obviously it's a pity that we've lost control, but no doubt local factors have played a part in this.
Very just a question, actually. It was 3 or 4 seats that needed to shift. Do we know in Nuneaton, just out of interest, how many seats did shift to the
No, we don't
Conservatives?
yet. We haven't done the result. We've heard the BNP.
But the loss of 3 seats would have lost
BNP were up to. We haven't heard the actual figures. Yes.
No, but we must be clear right now. This is going to be a very bad night for Labour indeed. And the only question is how bad. It's perfectly possible that at the end of the night, when we eventually see the estimated national share of the vote, we will see Labour going down below what they were in 2004. And that was pretty awful. We should be quite clear about it. The Liberal Democrats are picking up from Labour, even while losing to the Conservatives. And of course, we see Labour voters switching to the Tories. It's going to be awful. I don't see we can get away from that.
In other words, worse than Tony Blair straight after the Iraq War, when it was clear that there was no weapons of mass destruction.
Well, it looks like that.
Were tired of him. Now, we see when we look at these individual results how some don't look so good for the Tories, others do look good. So we started off with Cheltenham and Worcester, which will be disappointing to them if they want to win those seats. Obviously Harlow in Essex and now Nuneaton in Warwickshire, the sort of seats they need to pick up to form a government. Much better news for them and a building block for them to get those seats.
All right, well, we'll go down now to City Hall. You got
just one brief thing through the magic of email that comes across from a Conservative source, through here, not from the man in the studio here. They're predicting now 200 councillors gained.
And you're willing to go along with that? That was what Eric Pickles
Well,
was
I don't
saying,
have an email. I have a sheet of paper which says...
It doesn't very much written on it.
Well, it only says we are predicting 200 gains, but, we'll wait and see. I mean, I think we can start to say it is turning out to be a very good night for the Conservatives. We are winning across the country, winning in all parts of the country. It looks like our vote share may be up. But more importantly, we're actually gaining controls of lots of councils, and people are going to have a local Conservative council. So off a very difficult base for us in 2004, where everyone, including the BBC, was saying it's going to be very difficult to make gains tonight for the Conservatives, it looks like it's going to be a very good night.
Yes, we just said it was going to be, yes, we had you done well in 2004. And it would be difficult.
Well, that sounds all right to me. We're going to do even better, you see.
Now, just a word of warning. We've only had 19 out of 140 council results in that we're going to get. So there's a long way to go. But let's join Emily Maitlis.
Hi, David. Yes, I'm joined by John Culshaw, a divided man, a man who's no stranger to politics. He started life, many of you remember, as a spitting image, now best known for his dead ringers. John, it's funny, isn't it, sitting here in what they call the London living room of City Hall. It's been sort of Ken's spiritual home for the last 8 years. What do you think Boris would do if he got it?
I think he'd just sort of probably run into here and sort of, celebrate on a unicycle and be jolly excited and think, ha, here we are. But it's interesting watching how the tone of Boris changed through his campaign. There was much more of that famous sort of Boris Johnson jollity and informality and buffoonery at the beginning. And then, there seemed to be a tipping point where he thought, right, actually going to change now and be a little bit more serious. Sort of Boris means business, that sort of tone. And there was a sort of meandering as the campaign went on. But yes, I think he'd run in here and celebrate.
One of the commentators was just saying that the question is not if it's going to be bad for Labour tonight, but how bad it's going to be. Now, obviously, that's just one view, one voice. But what kind of a night do you imagine Gordon Brown's having?
Well, I suppose with this being the first test, in a sense. He'll be very nervous. You saw a sense of that when he was looking around some of the polling stations earlier. That slightly nervous smile was there. He'll probably be getting together a few of those catchphrases just to bat trouble away.
What are your favourite Brown catchphrases?
I think one of the catchphrases that he does use is, I'm just getting on with the job. That's the important thing, the deep responsibility of government.
And do you think he feels that sort of shadow of Tony Blair over his shoulder, sort of looking
probably
on?
at this stage. And I think, Blair used rather different catchphrases to bat away trouble. He would always say, look, what's important is, and what's important that we remember. And he'd sort of go very earnest and sort of change his body language and sort of speak from the heart like that. Whereas Gordon was, what's important to us, he was much more introspective and in this direction. A sort of more of a sense of nervousness, I suppose.
I'm thinking, we've all been riveted by the US elections the last, 5 months more. Do you think that Bush and his lot are all sort of sitting there watching the Wolverhampton primaries and the Sheffield caucuses and thinking, which way is it going to swing?
Well, they ought to be, but are they? Well, it's hard to believe that, George Bush is going there and thinking, this is really cool. This is like a fun-sized version of what we do. This is really neat. Good luck to Charlie Brown.
And a little bit of Cameron. We haven't talked about Cameron. He could be very nervous of Boris being in, or he could be very nervous of him not being in.
Yes, indeed. Up until now, I'd never really studied David Cameron as a voice, as a character. Never really put him under the microscope. But I think there is a growing feeling that we may have to now, and just get the sense of that, that jolly scoutmaster who's eager to please, and just get out more of those rather, posh Etonian idiosyncrasies and so on.
It'd be very interesting. I mean, Ken Livingstone is very much a part of London life, isn't he? You couldn't actually imagine a London without Ken, because he's been so much part of London's political history.
Exactly. And you sort of imagine what the contrasts would be if Boris were to take it. Would he mark out the congestion charge zone with a big circle of knotted sausages? How would it
You're
change?
sort of imagining some sort of friendly scoutmaster here, aren't you?
Yes, I suppose so. I suppose it'd be intriguing to see what the contrasts would be. And certainly something to watch over the next few years if it goes that way.
Okay.
Everyone making predictions at the moment. Could go anywhere.
I won't ask you for any predictions. But you've done plenty. John, thank you very much indeed. Back to you.
Good. Thanks very much. Now, the counting's going on all over the place still. We've got some more actual results in, and we'll see those. Nuneaton and Bedworth, as it's called. This is the Conservative gain from Labour. Labour down 6, Conservatives up 4, and the BNP, interestingly, get 2 seats. And Harlow, again, a Conservative gain from no overall control. Conservatives on 18, up 5. The Labour Party down 4, others down 1. And Rochdale, a Liberal Democrat hold, 33 for the Liberal Democrats, they're up 1. Labour down 1. And the Conservatives, no change. So, whose turn is it really? Yours, George Osborne.
Well, I was saying it's a good night, and the fact that we're winning in places like Nuneaton and Harlow is extremely important for us. And this is a truly shocking night for Labour. I mean, you remember Gordon Brown's people a year ago, when there was all that row about who was going to be the leader of the Labour Party. They were going around saying, if Gordon Brown was in charge, we wouldn't have these kind of problems at local elections. These local elections Tony Blair's just fought are terrible. Now we've got Gordon Brown in charge, this first electoral test. This is an unelected Prime Minister, and it's turning out to be, at least in the local elections, a very bad night for him, and he's going to have some explaining to do.
One of the things I think we need to bear in mind is there's an awful lot of focus on how well the Tories are doing, how well Labour is doing. What ultimately matters is the gap between the two. People keep saying the Conservatives need 40% to win. Well, it all depends on how badly or well Labour is doing. People seem to have forgotten already the 2005 election. The Labour Party got only 36% of the popular vote. Because it was far enough ahead of the Tories, the Labour Party won the election.
So when you said this was going to be a really catastrophic night for Labour, are you rowing back from that?
No, not at all. I'm making the point that if it's a catastrophic night for Labour, and as we expect, a pretty good night for the Conservatives, even if not a hugely better night than in 2004, 2007, the gap yawning between the parties will be a harder and harder gap for the Labour Party to make up in the time available.
And
that's all I'm saying.
Where do you fit the Liberal Democrats into this picture?
Well, we're talking now about forming the next government. That's the point I was making. The Liberal Democrats appear, on
They
the
could be
basis
critical
of
in that, couldn't they?
findings so far, to be doing the Labour Party a great deal of harm. And the reason they're doing that is that they're losing votes to the Conservatives, which put the Conservatives in a better position, and they're actually taking votes from Labour, as we've been seeing in council after council. And that's very bad news from the Labour Party's point of view.
David, can I just say, I do think there's a limit to the extent to which we can generalise from these results, council by council, to the likely result of a general election next year or the year after. I mean, of course, you know, these so far, you know, are not great results for us, and you know, people in different ways and for different reasons are communicating very clearly their unease. You know, the economy has been difficult. People feel that they are hurting. They feel under pressure and they feel anxious about their own future. And so that is undoubtedly a factor in this. The question is which party, which leader is best equipped to guide the country through this?
But isn't this going to be precisely the kind of result that damages Gordon Brown even more? We saw a moment ago in those opinion polls his reputation, the divided party, all those things that the public think about Labour. This is not going to improve things.
National Health Service, you know, where we were behind other parties. I mean, it's a...
The economy, the Tories ahead for the first time?
Well, but that's not surprising.
Oh,
you know,
really?
It's not surprising.
The man has been Chancellor of the Exchequer for 11 years.
It's not surprising, given the turbulence in the economy and the way in which, you know, international turbulence translates into private anxiety for families about whether or not they can afford their mortgage, whether they can get a mortgage, whether they can move house, you know, the increasing cost of food, and all these other factors are real in people's lives.
I want to come back to the Liberal Democrats for a moment, and perhaps I could go via Jeremy Vine. You might enjoy this, Charles.
Or I might not.
Or not.
Or not, depending. Jeremy.
Whenever you set something up like that.
See here, Dimble, this here is a shootout saloon. I'm looking for a politician to try my shooting skills on. I fancy that might just be the love potion of the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Cleggy boy, you in town? You around, boy? Your leathers may not fit, but at least you've got them on. I'm going to teach you how to point your gun, street boy. Have a look at these tin cans. 2004, the first one is marked. See what happens if I can shoot this? Just 1 second here. I'm going to try to aim straight. 29%, that's what you got in the local elections when your leader was Charles the Party Kennedy. He may have fond memories of that one. 2005, now it was a general election. Let's just try this one here. 23%. And we should just add that, of course, the Lib Dems go down for the general elections and tend to go up for the locals, the opposite way for the way the trend for Labour works. Let's carry on. Now we go to 2007. That was last year. What happens when I shoot this tin can? 26%. Who was the leader last year? Ming the Marshal Campbell. What happened to him? They ripped his waistcoat off and whooped his horse's butt, and he was gone. Let's see how you do, Cleggy. Take aim for us now. It's 2008. You got to hit that tin can. Have a go. Well, that's 30%. Boy, you get a vote like that, you'll be popular with the town's women here. They won't be making jokes about your performance no more. Try again, boy. 27%. That's starting to look dangerous. Marshall Ming got 26%, Cleggy. They ran him out of town. There was nothing left of him but his teeth. One more time. Well, you missed it altogether. 25%. Man, you're a danger to yourself. You might not be able to show your face around here no more. You shoot like that. Can you handle a gun, Cleggy? Well, now you're starting to look ridiculous. So we'll find out at the end of tonight. Is it Clegg the kid, the promising new boy in town, or Calamity Clegg? Back to you, Davy.
Oh, I see, that's the punchline.
Thanks. We're trying to work that out. Thanks, Jeremy.
Side splitting.
We're all full of admiration for the accent. We can't all understand quite what happens at the end there, but no doubt later on in the evening it'll be clear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Are you going to do it again in broad Texan, or is that have we had it now?
No, there's a contractual issue with doing it more than once. At the end, he'll shoot the can and we'll see the actual percentage, and we'll see whether he's in trouble or not.
Excellent. Well, now let's go back to the hard stuff. Well, that's perhaps not the right way to put it. Tim Iredale's in Lincoln. Tim.
That M word's going to be banded around tonight in connection with Labour meltdown. Let me just give you some figures just to show how Labour's support has evaporated in this part of the world. The Tories have just held Lincoln. They won it last year for the first time in more than 25 years. So they've now a clear majority on Lincoln City Council. Back in the 1990s, at the height of the unpopularity with the John Major government, Labour held all 33 seats here. There wasn't a single Tory in Lincoln. And look at Hull. Back in the 90s, 58 out of 59 council seats in Hull were Labour. They've done nothing there again tonight. The Lib Dems with a clear majority in Hull.
Thanks very much. We have news that the Tories have gained Southampton. They needed 7, I think, to gain it from no overall control.
Let's be clear, that's big.
Big story.
That was not on my list of towns that I thought, of councils that I thought the Tories would be likely to win at all. They've gained 4 seats from Labour, 3 seats from the Liberal Democrats, 1 seat from other. That is
altogether.
That is a sensational victory from the Conservatives' point of view. They should be very pleased indeed.
Now, remember, the Tories used to hold the parliamentary seats there, but John Denham is one of the people, the Cabinet Minister who's responsible for universities and skills, of course. His majority's around 9,000. Now, you wouldn't put that in your list of marginals. Now, of course, we're not saying that just because you take a council, you're about to take the MP's seat. But again, what we keep repeating, it's a building block to doing it, and it's one that they didn't expect to do, and frankly, we didn't expect them to do either. So it's particularly good news.
Two more Conservative gained councils. Let's just see the figures. Here they are. This is the Southampton one we were talking about, and there's the story. The Conservatives on 26. Now up 8 overall, Labour down 4, the Liberal Democrats down 3. And Elmbridge, another Conservative gain, 32 up 4, from overall no overall control, that is before. The Ratepayers Association, is that what RA is? I assume it is, down 3, Liberal Democrats down 1.
Just one footnote on Southampton. It's worth remembering that John Denham is the minister who, both in government and now and out of government before, warned his party about the need to hold on to the southern voters that Tony Blair was so successful in gaining. Now, the damage that's been done to him in Southampton, I suspect, will fuel him and others in the south of England saying to the Labour leadership, saying to Gordon Brown, you cannot take these people for granted. This is very serious indeed, and something has to be done to reassure them.
But how do you get them back, Tessa?
But you see, I don't think that anybody could suggest that the government is taking people for granted, and nor does anybody underestimate the importance of maintaining support right throughout the country. And you know, we're obviously
Charles Clarke thinks you're taking people for granted, doesn't he?
Well, I don't agree with Charles. I don't.
No, but you said nobody says it. But I mean, Charles Clarke was a very senior member of this government until he dropped out.
He was indeed. But making it clear that we don't take people for granted, conducting a sort of an assessment of the results tonight with due humility, understanding where people are sending a very clear message to the government, what that message is, as opposed to voting in relation to specific local circumstances. I mean, of course, that will follow.
John Denham himself, before these results came in, gave a speech that was not critical of his leader, of course, he's in the cabinet, but warned his party of the need to do more to hold on to those voters in the south of England. And what these results are likely to do is fuel that sort of debate, what needs to happen for the party to hold on to those voters. We saw the General Secretary of the Fabian Society talking about it as well. And the difficulty that poses for any party in government is if you have competing visions as to how you ought to do that. And there will be an argument, I think, that takes place in the Labour Party about exactly what to do. Well, some believe it is about returning to core vote and reassuring the core vote, and some people in the north of England may argue that. Others in the south say the old Blair formula of being near the centre is more important. It's exactly those sorts of tensions that will be played out, and those are harder to reconcile, David, when you've got no money to spend.
Let's go down to Colchester for a moment and join Clive Lewis there. Clive, good evening. Clive, can you hear us? You can't hear us. Clive Lewis in Colchester. Yes, good, great. Tell me what's been going on down there and what you've been following.
You said that once more for me?
Yes, Clive, what have you been following? What's actually happened in Colchester?
What's happening in Colchester at the moment? What we do know happening in Colchester is that the Conservatives here are currently in control. They're expecting to take this council, to hold on to this council. The Lib Dems are fighting for them. You see, what happened last local elections was that 2 Liberal Democrats defected over to the Conservatives. Now they're trying to claw on and hold on to that control here. But the Liberal Democrats are really putting up a fight. So it's pretty neck and neck at the moment. We will know pretty shortly what's going to happen here in Colchester.
And Ipswich and Harlow, have you been following those two as well?
Well, Harlow is a really good success story for the Conservatives. It's not unexpected, but it's a really good win for them. It is one of their priority targets here in the Eastern region. It's not a solidly Labour town. It's actually swung back and forward, but there have been some real key issues there, local issues and national. On the local side, they've obviously had the standstill expansion. That's been hugely unpopular, as well as the M11 corridor and a number of housing projects that have been planned for there. Extremely unpopular. And of course, on the national scene, there's been the 10p income tax changes, which we've been told has been proved extremely unpopular for Labour in Harlow. It's also worth mentioning that Lord Ashcroft has pumped a lot of money into Harlow. It's one of the most marginal constituencies in the parliamentary terms in this region, and in the country, in fact. I think Bill Rammell, the Education Minister there, has a majority of just 97. So it was looking a little bit dodgy there for Labour in the first place before today even happened.
OK, thanks so much, Clive. We rejoin Emily Maitlis, who's got the activist bloggers to report.
Things are hotting up in blogland indeed, and the interesting thing is we have promised to bring you the results before you bring us the results, so let's just see how our bloggers are doing. Iain, you're suggesting you are feeling Tory revival, but southernwards really.
No, it's not at all. There are lots of Tory gains in all parts of the country. They've gained 6 seats in Sunderland, which a few years ago would just be unthinkable. But what all the parties will be doing tonight is looking at the marginal seats for key indications of what's going to happen in the general election. And you've got seats like Exeter, Ben Bradshaw's seat, where Labour are now in 3rd place, Tory gains there. In Norwich, Charles Clarke and Ian Gibson, the Conservatives have now got 5 seats on Norwich City Council. It may not sound a lot, but they haven't had 5 seats for 40 years.
The Lord Ashcroft strategy, right? I mean, it shows you pump the money in and it seems to work.
In Norwich,
right?
It certainly isn't the case, because he hasn't given any money to the Norwich seats, and I'm not sure there's any gone into Exeter. But all around the country now, you're finding Conservative gains in marginal seats, particularly in the West Midlands and East Midlands. Birmingham, I think at least 3 seats have gone Conservative tonight. Nuneaton they've taken, and they haven't held Nuneaton since 1973. So I think there's real calls for celebration in the Tory camp tonight.
Alex, tell us what the tone is with the Lib Dems. You were looking a little bit fretful about Liverpool.
Yeah, I think we always knew Liverpool was going to be difficult. At the moment, we've lost, I think, 3 or 4 seats there. But on the plus side, I mean, we've gained in Knowsley,
I mean, a badly run council, it always comes across as a badly run council.
Worked out as badly as we thought, because we're making gains in neighbouring Knowsley, which has been Labour since forever. Our main success story is in the south. I mean, there's supposedly this great thing about Tory resurgence in the south, but we're predicted to hold St Albans, to take St Albans rather. We've held Winchester, looking to take Cheltenham.
Just in terms of the actual tone, how are the Lib Dems? I mean, the Lib Dems are a phlegmatic lot anyway, but how is your...
I can tell you 2 things about the Lib Dems' tone. On the one hand, we're perfectly happy. We had a fantastic year in 2004. Exactly, we're always happy. We had such a fantastic year in 2004. We really weren't looking to make many gains this time, and I'm very pleased that we're just not losing very much. It's great. The second thing I can tell you is the Lib Dems are rather upset, as actually most of the political blogosphere is about Jeremy Vine. Apparently...
oh no, it's not the accents. I think we might be getting complaints about the accents.
Yeah.
1 second.
I don't think it's the accent. I think it's just more the overall, well, everything he's doing, really. Let me see. A polite comment. Please, please, please tell Jeremy Vine to stop doing that now.
Right, that wasn't me. I have to distance myself from all these kind of blog comments. Luke, tell us what you're getting in terms of tone again, because, you know, some people are already, even at this early stage, talking about, oh, Labour meltdown and it's really looking bad. Are you getting that sort of feedback from the comments?
Not from either Labour commenters or from other Labour blogs, and people seem to be picking up bits of good news, seat gains in some of the northern cities like Liverpool and Manchester. Also, some key parliamentary marginals where the results aren't that bad. Where Hastings, I believe, we've actually picked up a seat from the Liberals. Worcester, there was an iconic seat because of Worcester woman in the last general election. No change at all. So, yeah. Labour morale seems to be holding
Any
up
mention
pretty well.
of Ken at the moment? I mean, it's a difficult one to blog in the sense nothing's happening, but I know you've been working hard on that all day.
People don't know how to call the London result. We know that the turnout was very good in inner city areas where Labour's strong, but we also know that the turnout was very good in the Tory suburban areas. So who knows? We've got to get into the count tomorrow and start seeing exactly how those votes weigh up before we can predict that.
Okay, thanks to you all. I see these little smiles going on, and you're not always inside the mind of a blogger, but this is the way to be. This is our webpage, bbc.co.uk/elections. Here is my page. Do come and join me. I'm about to sit down and blog, Twitter, Chatter, whatever. Do add your comments there. We'd love to hear from you. Back to you.
Right, thanks very much. Now, have a look at the Council's scoreboard and see how that's going. And the Council's scoreboard, we'll see that. First of all, the councils, and this is how things stand with only 40 in and over 100 to go. Conservatives have gained control of 6 councils overall. Labour has lost control of 2, and from no overall control, hung councils, they're down 4 in favour of the Conservatives. And on the councillors, this is how things stand at the moment. The Conservatives are up 48, Labour down 38, Liberal Democrats down 3, others down 7. Let's now go to Southampton and join Caroline Richardson to talk about that spectacular Tory victory in Southampton. Caroline.
Certainly wasn't expected, David. Certainly devastating for the Labour group and for the Liberal Democrat group. I mean, certainly it was a mathematical possibility that it might be a Conservative majority, but it just wasn't expected. Just to fill you in on some of the local politics, the Conservative group used to run the council as a minority administration. They had a budget meeting in February, at which point the Labour and Lib Dem group formed a coup, effectively, and took over administration of the council. And of course now it's the local elections, the electorate have turned out. Many people thought that was a little bit undemocratic doing that mid-term, and it seems that the electorate have voted with their feet and the tide has turned back in the favour of the Conservatives.
Any idea what the turnout was? Did a lot of people go to the polls?
As far as I'm aware, the turnout was pretty good. We've had a glorious day down here in the south of England, so a lot of people might have been coaxed out by warm, sunny spring weather. Another reason why a lot of people probably turned out to vote was this idea, this recommendation that the Liberal Democrats and Labour had to charge people for permit parking. That became very unpopular, even though it was only a recommendation. There were people who were vowing to concrete their front gardens so that they didn't have to pay to park outside their houses. So if you want to know whether people are voting on local issues in the south of England, then I think, yes, the answer is yes.
Do you expect any other councils around Southampton to fall to the Tories in the same way from no overall control? Gosport,
the only other one that we've really got our close eye on is Gosport, because nobody has overall control of Gosport since 1996. Now, they could take control, but only if they win one ward. All the other wards had massive majorities 4 years ago. But if there's a 1% swing in the Rowner Holbrook ward in Gosport from Labour to Conservative, then that could be another Tory scalp.
And what are the implications for the MPs in the area? Have you got John Denham down there, by the way? We were told he was going to be there.
We do have John Denham down here. I'm sure he'd be happy to speak to you later on. I did ask him about an hour ago if he was bracing himself for a difficult night. He said he was. I would imagine that all his worst fears have been confirmed now.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Caroline. We've got the result from Wyre Forest. Conservative gain from no overall control. This is in Worcestershire. This is where the IKHH, the Kidderminster Hospital supporters, had 10 and retained 10 councillors. The Conservatives are up 4 overall at the expense of others. I'm not quite sure who those others would be. The Liberals, there are Liberals there, are down 1. Liberal Democrats stay on 2. No Labour in Wyre Forest? No Labour councillors? I think not.
MP.
Yeah. Used to have a Labour MP.
Quite a big majority, is it?
And Weymouth and Portland, a hung council. Conservatives up 2, Liberal Democrats up 1, Labour down 2, others down 1.
A lot of people, David, have been referring to local issues. And of course, if you look at any particular place, quite a few people are going to have voted on the strength of the performance of the local council or whatever. But when you get results of the kind we're getting now, local issues may not pale into insignificance in one place or another place or another place, but nationally they do pale into insignificance.
The overall
there's no
saying.
randomness about this. The Conservatives are doing very well all over the country. Labour is doing very badly all over the country, and there is a pattern to the Liberal Democrat performance as well.
You're the person, when looking at local councils, who always emphasises that local elections are local elections. So what you're saying really is that idea has been swept aside by the scale of change tonight.
No, the idea hasn't been swept aside. Different councils have very different patterns of party support. Look at Hull, for example, where you have 3 Labour members of Parliament with huge majorities. The Liberal Democrats control the council. There are different patterns of voting around the country. It's the change which is not random. It's uniform in this case to a quite remarkable extent.
It may be, David, that one individual issue, like the parking permits issue that we were just talked about, gives you some account as to why there's a big swing in a particular place. But when the pattern is of real problems, then of course it's different. Now, what we're hearing from our people behind the scenes is it looks as though Labour will really struggle to keep Reading, for an example. So when you look at the south of England and say, are the Blair gains in the south of England being protected? The answer is very simply no. Why does that matter? Because 17 out of the top 24 marginal seats for the government are in the south of England.
We don't get Reading until tomorrow. Charles, I'll come to you in a moment, but I just want to go to get the picture from Wales.
Is an issue in Reading, though, just as the budget
but hold on, let's not go down inner relief roads. Let's go for
all round.
Let's go for all round to Wales and join Betson Powys. What's the picture there, Betson?
Well, apologies straight away for the may and the might, but that's where we're at. But earlier I asked you to listen out for names like Flintshire, Newport, Blaenau Gwent, and that's where the stories, the early stories, are coming from. Now then, 3 councils in the east of Wales, 3 councils that since they've been unitary authorities have been held by Labour. Now then, the implication is that in Flintshire, just the 1 councillor is a majority there, so no surprise perhaps that Flintshire is one that is slipping to no overall control. Newport, Wales's youngest city, now the only one that is held by Labour. This one will really hurt if it goes well. Labour Deputy Minister in the Assembly, John Griffiths, is there, and certainly his view of things is that Newport is slipping to no overall control. Both the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives in a pincer movement gaining ground there. And that other name that you'll be familiar with, I'm sure, Blaenau Gwent. Plenty of discussion about how to pronounce it, first of all, but it's also, of course, been a thorn in Labour side for a while. It was held by Peter Law, the Labour Assembly member and Member of Parliament. Fell out with the party, stood as an independent, kept both seats. The Assembly seat is now held by his widow, Trish Law. The Westminster seat also held by People's Voice. Well, it looks like they're doing damage again to Labour in Blaenau Gwent, as are some other independents. So things look as if they're being pushed towards no overall control there again. If that's right, then the 7 councils that Labour did hold outright, if they lose 3, then clearly already they will be down to just the 4.
Betson, thank you very much. Let's go and see what the key wards are showing now. We saw them at very early stage, three-quarters of an hour or so ago, and Jeremy has a reassessment of them. Jeremy?
Yes, I do. We've got many more in now, David, so it's firming up. I mean, this is the exercise we do with nearly 1,000 wards, just to see if we can work out how this election would look if it was played out across the whole nation instead of just being a local election. Let me show you where we are at the moment with this. 47%, nearly half our key wards are in, and more than 1 million votes, real votes, they're counting. So we can have a look at the state of the parties, where they are on. And just before I show you, just to underline what you've been saying, this is on 2004. So you're dealing with a baseline here where Labour hit a record low of 26%. Let's see whether they're up or down, first of all. Where is Labour tonight? Well, we have them down 2%, down even on their lowest in living memory. Labour down tonight. Clearly a fairly disastrous performance if that is shown to be the case. Conservatives doing extremely well, up 7% on 2004's performance. And Lib Dems, let's have a look at them, down 3%. Not such a convincing performance from them at all. And the others then down 2%. So that's our key ward exercise. May change as we get towards 100% of key wards, and at a certain point we will bank it and we'll give you a projected national share, so we'll give all the parties a percentage later in the night. Now, if I could just focus on the map again and just show you some of the councils that have changed hands, some of the ones we've been talking about in the studio. Here it is. This is the terrain. The raised grey bits are the places where voting has happened. And these are, that was the House, the Council's allocation as we went into the night, the colours of the councils as they were held by parties before the voting. And now I can just show you quickly how it looks now that we have seen some results coming in. So you see quite a bit of blue there. That will obviously change and develop through the night. Let's focus then on some of these individual councils. And first of all, Nuneaton and Bedworth. I had mentioned this is one of those. Firstly, it's one of only 2 Labour districts up. But secondly, it's that remarkable clarity of this result that a 4% swing would take it straight from Labour control to Conservative control. That's exactly what happened. And those 2 BNP seats were mentioned there as well. The more puzzling result, which came in very early, which you discussed in the studio, was this Worcester result, where hung council, and you really would have expected that to go Conservative. They just needed 1 gain there in Worcester, and they didn't get it. So that's worth noting as well. Kingston upon Hull, when the Lib Dems are told they haven't done as well as they wanted to, or they should have done, or whatever, they will mention Kingston a lot, I think. Lib Dem control previously, and then there were defections to Independent and so on, so they lost control of it. They've now got Kingston upon Hull back. What should we look at next? Southampton, well, of course, you were just down there searching for John Denham, former minister. Southampton, what exactly? 8 gains for the Conservatives there. That's got to be, so far, one of the triumphs of their night. The fact that they have taken Southampton. And Harlow here as well, from hung to Conservative, another part of this picture of the Conservatives doing very well indeed. So there we are. Those are the councils as they stand at the moment, as the results come in, and our key ward exercise gradually firming up, and we'll give you something more solid in due course.
Jeremy, thank you very much. We estimate that the Conservatives at the present have more councils under their control than Labour had at their peak in 1996. 207. Now, Charles and Tessa, you're going to leave us soon and be replaced, and William Hague has joined us as the Shadow Foreign Secretary. Last word from both of you before you escape.
Remember me this way, I definitely prefer the West Highlands to the Wild West. I've decided watching Jeremy a few minutes ago. Just as a read across, because although it's fairly early days yet, if you take local authorities and parliamentary seats that we'll be defending next time, is quite interesting, and I think from our point of view encouraging with a view to the next general election. Cheltenham, Rochdale, Eastleigh, Cambridge, very possibly Colchester. These have all been fairly solid holds at local authority level, if not gains, from a Lib Dem viewpoint. That augurs well for the next general. And results coming in we haven't touched on yet. We're making gains from Labour in Derby, for example, down to the south coast that we were talking about earlier, next to Portsmouth, a seat that we hold, my good pal Mike Hancock there. Gosport, Lib Dems gaining 3 on the south coast from the Conservatives. So we still seem to have this ability to take on Labour in one part and the Conservatives in the other, and hold areas where we've got parliamentary seats to defend. So, thus far, and I make my exit in this positive point. It might change as the night goes on, who knows, once I've left.
Call you back.
Thus far, reasons to be cheerful, I think, from our point of view.
Okay. If there's bad news, I think we'll phone, shall we?
If there's bad news, we'll have Sarah Tether here and put it to her. Thank you very much. And
Pleasure.
Tessa.
Just 2 or 3 points. You know, I think that as the night goes on, I mean, nobody's going to pretend this is our greatest night, but that people.
Be hard. We'll try.
You know, I'm in touch with reality. But the serious point is that, you know, as each of these results have come in, you know, we know that in some local issues have played a part. But I mean, generally, I mean, I think that we would, you know, certainly, you know, we would all recognise that, you know, these elections have been conducted, have been conducted in the context of people feeling exposed, people feeling anxious about the state of the economy and the impact of that on them. And you know,
how does it augur for Ken Livingstone, whose campaign you organised or were supporting?
I think that what was important about the London campaign is the extent to which it was a London campaign. Of course, you know, these broader issues about insecurity and so forth it played their part. But you know, this has been a campaign between two big and well-known personalities, and you know, the questions for London have been, you know, which of these is best to take London forward as the world-class
So you're still hopeful,
city.
in effect, Ken Livingstone may...
Turnout has been unexpectedly high, not just in the outer London boroughs, but also in inner London. You know, in somewhere like Hackney, the same level as the is the general election, with people queuing to get into the polling station. One polling district in the north of London where they ran out of ballot papers. So this is an election which has galvanised London, and you know, I don't think anybody would call the result before it's declared about 5 o'clock tomorrow.
Emily Maitlis has something to tell us about that, but thanks very much, Tessa Jow. Let's join Emily.
Yeah, it's very easy on a night like this, David, to get wrapped up in the minutiae of all the details and the facts and the figures and every single councillor in every single seat. But actually, there's quite a personal story going on here as well. And I'm joined right now by Stanley Johnson, otherwise known as Boris's dad, as the rosette would probably give away, by Dave Rowntree, former Blair, and now very much a Labour activist, and by the actress and writer Clemency Burton-Hill, who calls herself a floating voter, and we're quite interested to see which side she's come down tonight. But Stanley, let's start with you. It must be quite nerve-wracking watching this as a dad. I'm trying to imagine what you first said to Boris when he said, "Dad, I'm going to become mayor."
Yeah, I said, now this was way back in July last year, I said go for it. And what has been really interesting to me is to see how the essential seriousness of Boris's character has actually finally been recognised over the course of this very, very well-run campaign. You see, you've had people like Polly Toynbee on The Guardian peddling this total garbage, you know, and some of it actually actionable. That he's a sociopath.
We're not going to get into libel details just yet. But in terms of Boris,
the point I'm trying to make here is it's been a very easy run for these people saying Boris is a clown. Oh, easy. I mean, Ken's been doing it himself. Boris is a clown. Don't vote for a clown. Well, Boris has trumped that argument absolutely, totally. He's run a clear, firm campaign.
do you see him as a changed man? Do you think he has altered his public persona?
Look, anybody who has read, as I have read over 20 years, a series of articles, well-written, well-researched, well-expressed articles, know he is a serious man. That's why I say the whole thing has been garbage. That's why, for me, the great relief is that finally there has been a recognition that this is not a clown, this is not a buffoon, this is a very serious person who is moving the Conservative Party forward at this point.
Clemency, where do you sit on this one? I mean, you call yourself a floating voter. Did you take Boris seriously? Would that have influenced how you voted?
I desperately wanted to be able to take seriously a candidate that wasn't Ken Livingstone, because to me the idea of having to vote again for Ken Livingstone was frankly nauseating. And so for a long time I really hoped that either the Conservatives or the Lib Dems would offer up a viable candidate that would ultimately swing it. But I have to say that over the last few weeks I have been studying things very carefully, and you know, I have great respect for Boris in many ways as a writer and as a brain, but I'm afraid, Stanley, I just don't think that he has the experience or the credentials for this job.
Do you see him as a changed man? You heard Stanley saying that he'd put his critics to bed by showing actually he was pretty serious about his policies and about his campaigning. He's worked very hard. Not convinced though.
He's serious about his ambition, and I think he's learned his brief very well. He's obviously an incredibly clever guy. I think Linton Crosby has done a good job in terms of sort of sanitising him and sort of shutting him up. But I think that essentially, I think that the true nature of Boris Johnson, which works brilliantly in some capacities, is not the right person to be Mayor of London, and I'm sorry that's the way I had to come down in the end.
You voted for Ken.
Well, I think the secret ballot is one of the hardest won democratic freedoms, Emily, so I'm not going to tell you who I voted.
Yes.
But I think the next 4 years in London are so key in terms of delivering projects like Crossrail, £16 billion, the Olympics. These are not issues that can be taken lightly. And what I really hope, because I think Boris could make a good mayor, is that he would take Ken Livingstone up on his offer last week to give up his seat and go and take a job in City Hall and learn how to do it and win next time around.
Let me bring Dave in. You're an out-and-out Ken fan. Ken's appeared on your albums, for goodness sake.
He has, well, an album, certainly, yes, and he played with us
at
Wembley Arena. No, he was terrible, but that was the whole point. We wanted a kind of whiny-voiced, accountancy kind of man, so he fitted the spot exactly.
But yes, now you're joining his side, as it were. You want to go into politics and Labour, even with everything that you're hearing about.
I'm an out-and-out Ken fan, and I have to say, listen to what the other two guests have said, I'm not sure I was in the same election. I didn't see Boris become a serious politician. You
didn't watch the television?
No, I really did. I really did watch the television.
I think
I have to say, what I saw was a rather vague, uncosted set of a programme of ideas that really couldn't bring to fruition.
I wish we didn't have to hand back to you. In fact, I'd quite like to keep this three here for another half an hour or so, David, but I feel that you're pulling us away.
Well, I'm only reluctantly pulling you away because we've got John Denham joining us from Southampton, the Secretary of State for Universities and Skills and various other things, who came back into the government when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister. Do you rather regret the decision that you came back into government in view of the figures that are coming through tonight, John Denham?
No, because I'm very proud of what the government's achieving. Obviously, there's some disappointments tonight, and we've been listening to what voters have been saying to us. But I'm proud of what we've done over the last 10 years, and I think we've now got to go back to voters and say, we've heard about the issues you're talking about. We're going to get through the difficult time we've got at the moment with the international credit crunch and food prices and petrol and so on, and we will get back to what you've enjoyed over the last 10 years in the South, and that has been, for the great majority of people, rising standards of living, better public services. That's what people want. At the moment, they have obviously felt shaky about that tonight, uncertain, but we will come back from this and we will win the next general election.
About the Tory success in Southampton, which seems to have taken everybody by surprise.
Well, Labour didn't have anything like a majority in Southampton. There was an agreement between Labour and the Liberals. Between the two parties, they only needed to lose 2 seats in order to lose that minority administration. Now, the story of the night here in Southampton is the Liberal Democrat vote has collapsed. They haven't won a single seat. And that, and frankly, with some of our own voters staying at home rather than switching to other parties, has cost us a number of marginal seats.
You mean you didn't actually lose any seats? The Liberal Democrats lost seats and not you? The figures show -3 for the Liberal Democrats and -4.
We lost seats, but if you look at those seats, my reading of it, it's early in the evening, is the Liberal Democrat vote collapsed. Some of our own voters stayed at home. Certainly, we didn't find people who were switching parties, and the Tories got their votes out. That's what happens in these local election nights. But if you said to me, can we go from here, show the voters we've been listening to the things they're genuinely concerned about, show that we can address them here in the South, then we can and we will win the next election.
Just a reminder of the Southampton result, in view of what you were saying, John Denham. Conservatives 26, up 8, Labour 14, down 4, Liberal Democrats 8, down 3.
That's right. That's right, and I'm explaining
that it's bad for the Liberal Democrats, but not bad for you. I don't understand it.
No, it's very bad for Liberal Democrats, and in wards where they used to get substantial votes, they didn't, and we lost in the... Pardon?
How is it for you? Good?
Pardon?
How is it for you then? Good for you?
Look, David, I'm not trying to pretend that this is a good night, but I thought you might be interested into an explanation here. Look, the reality is we didn't win this election. We listened in the campaign to what people were talking about, and particularly our own voters who said they weren't going to vote this time. Those voters weren't telling us they were switching parties. Now, what do we have to do? We have to say, firstly, we have done a lot over the last 10 years, but to win the right to get those votes back and get people out to vote for the next time, we've got to show that we've listened to the concerns they've showed. Now, people are worried about the things that are happening internationally and the housing market and domestic issues. But if we show that we've listened to people and we respond, then we can get through the difficult times we've got at the moment and come back and win the next election.
But hang on a second. If people are worried by things like what's happening internationally, what's happening in the United States, if it was a government they trusted, it wouldn't mean they went away from that government. If they trusted it, they'd stick with it. And instead, they're abandoning you in droves tonight.
No, what we need to do is when people have had a long period of time in which they voted for us, and they've now got difficult times and people aren't used to that, we have to win and earn that trust every day. Now, clearly there have been issues in the course of this election campaign and issues in the wider world that we've got to respond to. And that's what we will do over the next few months. And we can say to the people in the south of England, we have actually delivered 10 very good years. Yeah. Things are more difficult at the moment. We need to show that we understand the things they're concerned about, and then we will come back and win in the south over the next 2 years.
In the meantime, on your analysis, they're risking all with the Tories instead of with Labour. Nick Robinson's got a question for you. Just hang on a second.
Mr Denham, you've written over the years, haven't you, of the importance of holding on to those southern voters for New Labour that, of course, Tony Blair helped you to gain. What is it that you now think the party, the government of which you're a part now, has to do? I mean, listening clearly, obviously, but what specifically did the government have to do to try and reassure those voters?
I think there are 2 or 3 things. The first is clearly people who have actually benefited, and I think it's a majority of people in all the southern seats, whether they vote Labour or not, over the last 10 years, are now finding things difficult. They're saying we're working hard, but we're not getting from it the things we want from life. We've got to show people we've listened to that, but more than that we've listened, we've understood what the causes of that are, and things like the credit crisis, we've got to get through those. We've got to recognise that there are people who don't feel they've fully shared in that over the last 10 years, and we've got to show them that we can deliver for them too. The people who've said to us in this campaign, we're working hard, but it just doesn't seem fair, we can't get what we want at the moment, they are the people that we've got to show we've listened to right across the south, and if we do that, we will win.
John Denham, thank you very much for joining us. Jeremy Vine. Jeremy Vine has a view of the fate of the Prime Minister. Jeremy.
Well, just listening to John Denham there, David, underlines the fact that whatever the numbers say, they will be traded over by the politicians, and how do we actually judge the result? We went back to Vince Cable, the Liberal Democrats' phrase, where he rather cruelly said that Mr Brown had, in a short space of time, gone from Stalin to Mr Bean. So here he was, when he became Prime Minister, commander of all he surveyed, and in control. And, by the way, in the polls, on 44%, a distant memory must seem like to some Labour MPs now, because gradually things started going wrong. The snap election was called off, and here's Mr Brown looking not quite like he's in command of all his surveyed. I think he's being brought food by young children. He's lying down a bit fatigued there. And gradually then we've seen the Bean characteristics creeping in, the lost data discs and Northern Rock and all the problems, and what were the polls saying? He's coming down again, 35%. And this next portrait, doing a bit of competition to Rowan Atkinson here. That was painted when he was thinking that the 10p tax change was a good idea. Polls coming down again, 32%. So we're seeing a progression here. Where does it end up with Mr Bean? Is that where the night will end up? Well, I'll try and give you a bit of context again. That's always a great way to progress these things. 1997, when Mr Blair was leader of the opposition, he became Prime Minister with 44% of the vote. That was the Blair landslide election victory. And we've said before, haven't we, that Labour tend to do better in generals than they do in locals. So even as early as 97, going through this progression, you start to see this up-down effect. Down for the local elections in 2000, up again to win the 2001 election, 42%. And then this critical figure we've come back to again and again tonight, 26%, the lowest in living memory for Labour. And that was the 2004 local elections. Doubly significant tonight because that's the year against which the councils we're seeing tonight were last fought. So 2004, 26%. But they came back, and this is one crumb of comfort for Labour, that even that record low was followed by an election victory in 2005, 36%. And then 27% in 2007. This was Tony Blair just nudging up from that lowest ever figure. So this time last year we were talking about local elections and we were wondering, would he go below 26%? Tony Blair's last local elections, did he? No, he didn't. And his allies said, well, we've come off the bottom. So that's the story of the last 11 years. Why don't we just focus on this figure here, this 26%, and make it really simple? But if Mr. Brown goes below 26%, then he's not Brown anymore. How about that? If he goes below 26%, he's not Brown because he's been, or has been.
Adding insult to bad results for Labour. We've been joined by three new politicians now. Ed Miliband, the Cabinet Office Minister, is with us. William Hague, Shadow Foreign Secretary, and Vince Cable, who, as the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesman, when he was temporarily leader of the Liberal Democrats, invented that whole conceit about Stalin to Mr. Bean.
Well, now you've stolen the last stage in the progression, which there has been.
And do you think that's what he's reached?
Not quite, no, definitely not, but on the way, certainly.
What do you think's happened to the Liberal Democrats? Because you've done a wee bit worse at the moment on the national popular share of the vote. You're down 3 points on where you were in 2004. How can that be?
Well, we didn't expect anything very different from that. I think the
not
point that
expecting. Sorry, not expecting is a phrase that people use when the worst happens.
Well, it's not the worst. No, Charles Kennedy, I think, made the point earlier on. I mean, we were 2004, in terms of aggregate votes, was inflated by protests over the Iraq War. We knew that at the time. And
you had popular policies, you mean?
Well, the Iraq War was certainly the position we took was a very popular one. It remains so, but it's less of a salient issue. And we accept that we've lost some ground from that. But I think the point he made, which is a very important one, if we're looking ahead to the significance of the general election, and those things go up and down, I mean, it depends very much on the seats where we have sitting MPs. You've seen, I think earlier on in your programme, you cited Cheltenham as an example of a bellwether seat. Will we going to do better or worse than the Conservatives there? I think we've actually gained from the Conservatives in that area. We've held on to Rochdale, which another marginal seat has against Labour. And I think in the key areas where we're going to be fighting at the next general election, marginal seats, MPs with small majorities hoping to make gains, we will have held our ground or done better.
And if you're down from last year when Ming Campbell was leader, will you regret the choice of Nick Clegg?
No, I mean, he's got nothing to be worried about personally. I mean, since he came in, New Year, our position's gone up 16%, 19%. Obviously, we've got a long way to go to get to a really strong position, but he's doing well.
Would Vince Cable have done better?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Ed Miliband, this is looking bad for Labour, as Tessa Giles, who's been here for the last hour or so, was saying. What do you attribute it to? You heard what John Denham was saying. None of it sounds very convincing. It's all people will ever say on Labour is, well, we've got to listen to people and we've got to show people we care. But actually, it's a pretty devastating blow when the Tories are up 7 points. They're actually listening to the Tories, aren't they?
Disappointing. Look, I'd say the three things, David. First of all, mid-term governments tend not to do well at local elections.
Are you a mid-term government? You've just had a new Prime Minister appointed.
Well, I know, but we're in the third term of a Labour government. Let me just explain my reasons and then come back to me. First of all, I think that's always the case. I think we've polled under 30% at most local elections since 1997. Secondly, very difficult economic circumstances. I think John is right about that, particularly an issue in the south, but I think across the country. I got that in my constituency in Doncaster, a sense of difficult economic times. Thirdly, the government has had a difficult few months, and I think there's no getting away from that. A whole series of things have happened.
So you've got no bounce from Brown's becoming Prime Minister?
Well, actually, we did get bounce, but we've had some difficult events in the last few months.
What would those be? Not having an election in November?
That was one of the things, yeah.
Mistake?
I don't think it was a mistake. No, I think the speculation was allowed to go on too long, and I think we all accept our share of responsibility.
So that was a mistake.
For that. Yeah, well, letting the speculation go on was
the 10p confusion.
The 10p was difficult in the 10p was difficult in the campaign. Yeah, it was difficult. Let me just say one other thing though, which is, does this mean that somehow the Tories have it in the bag for the general election? Absolutely not, in my view. The task for us is to show, as John said, that we can respond to people's concerns. And let me make a sort of ideological point, if I may, unusual maybe, on these programmes, which is the mood of the times is not for what the Tory party stand for, which is government getting out of the way. Philosophically, that's really what William and his colleagues still believe in. And when you think about the issues people are facing in the global economy, in concerns around social care, big issue I find, in any case, on the doorstep, looking after elderly relatives, education, whole series of issues, I don't think the mood of the times is for what William stands for. Now, our task... Let me just...
Well, no, you can't say let me go on any longer because
well, the
it's
mood
time
of these
for
elections
William
is for what the Conservatives stand for. It's quite hard to sit there and say, well, as the Conservatives gain seats all over the country, the mood isn't with the Conservative Party. Clearly, these are exceptional results, and if this projection, if the BBC projection is right, then I think I'm right in saying this would be the lowest Labour share of the vote in the modern history of local
If it does go...
That is not just a mid-term thing. So these are, I think we've seen enough results now to say these are exceptionally good results for the Conservative Party. And across the country, you know, when you see 6 Conservative gains in Sunderland, we haven't seen all the Bury results yet, but an important ward in Bury changing, some big swings in some of the Bolton wards. I think the idea the Conservatives cannot win in the north will also be laid to rest tonight.
But you would accept what Ed Miliband said, that this doesn't mean you automatically win a general election next year or the year after?
Oh, we are not going to think the next election is in the bag until the votes at the next general election have been counted. And of course, we hope they come out in the same way. We will take nothing for granted. But we've taken steady steps. Since David Cameron became the leader in each set of elections, we have taken a step forward. And this looks like it's a big step forward.
I think the big significance of the results tonight is that they are worse for Labour than immediately after the Iraq War, when Tony Blair was severely unpopular, when it was evident by then that there were problems in Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction had not been found. That is bad, and it's significant because Gordon Brown's election as Labour leader was billed as a renewal for the party. Does it mean that renewal is not possible? Well, of course it doesn't, but it means the principal card that many people believed had to be played in the Labour Party, which is change the leader, hasn't done the trick. Now, their hope must be that this is because of the state of the economy, that it is a return, if you like, to politics as normal in the Tory years, where they had mid-term blues and then recovered and beat the Labour Party quite easily. But there will have to be long, hard thinking after tonight in the Labour Party about how on earth they now turn this round.
Because we're talking not 26%, but 24% of these figures go on as they are at the moment.
And it's not since Harold Wilson's day that we've been talking about that. This already, remember, at the beginning of the evening, this was the lowest number of Labour councillors in 35 years. And from what we can tell, that will be going backwards. They will be getting in a worse position at the end of the night.
It's before you were in long trousers, Ed Miliband, isn't it? Not been as bad.
I can't say I remember the Wilson days with sort of as much recollection as maybe.
Born in the Wilson.
I was. I remember him resigning. I remember him resigning. Actually, play school was cancelled that that day. I remember.
Can I just make a point about the gap? I went back through the records to see what was the largest gap between the two major parties that nevertheless resulted in the party that had been behind actually winning the next election. And if you go back to 1985, you find that the Tories had a catastrophically bad time. In 1985, they went on to win in 1987. The gap then between the two major parties was 11 points. And in a few moments, presumably, we're actually going to see the projection and we'll see how large the gap is now between the two main parties, which is in the end what matters.
Let's just have the result from Maidstone. The Conservatives, well, Maidstone was run by the Liberal Democrats, the minority, I don't know what you call it, government cabinet running Maidstone. Conservatives have gained it up 2, Liberal Democrats down 1, and Labour down 2. And at this point, it's time to catch up with the results in more detail wherever you're watching in the country.
Oh, OK. We can talk about that. Hello, you join me now with 3 London politicians David Lammy for Labour, Lynn Featherstone for the Lib Dems. And we're not quite sure, Sean Bailey, whether to call you a politician or not. A political face entering the fray for the Tories.
That's right.
And we'll come back to that point in a second. Lynn, let's start with the mayoral race. Start with Brian Paddock, who we haven't discussed much this evening yet. Matthew Dancona called him the amiable gooseberry in the mayoral contest.
That's so unkind. He's been a
that was quite nice.
Well, he didn't actually look like that, but are you saying that Ken and Boris were having an affair?
I'll leave that one to you.
Brian Paddock's been a fantastic candidate, but I think, it is tough being squeezed between two such eminent and long-serving, well-known politicians in an age of celebrity.
He could have decided this one, though. If he had let us know his second preference, that could have had a big influence.
Well, I think, as he puts it, you shouldn't really have to tell a Liberal Democrat where to put their second vote, actually. He feels and he felt that it was really up to Londoners to decide, and obviously they'd be Lib Dem voters if it was a second preference to Brian. He felt it really depended on what their view was and what they thought, and he did not want to influence. And his view was a plague on both their houses. Neither of them were up to much, and he wouldn't take a job in their damned administration anyway.
Yeah, and he definitely got the sound bites going. He called your candidate tragedy, Sean's candidate comedy. Tell us about tragedy, David Lammy. Do you think Ken is looking like a tired man these days?
Look, I was with him today in Tottenham, in the heart of Tottenham, walking up the streets, and I have to say that the genuine love, I think, that people have for him in the inner city, in the heart of the inner city, tremendous warmth. A lot of people saying, you can do it, Ken, you're going to do it, and, we went out and voted for you. So, no, he looked very buoyant.
And yet it's hard to ignore this time round these allegations of sleaze. Now, I admit they're allegations, there's nothing concrete against him, but that stuff can stick, and he has tied himself very closely to one of his advisors who's now resigned.
Yes, and this has been a tough campaign. And one of London's leading newspapers has led that campaign to some extent, and I think it's right to say that there has been no sleaze proven. I'm convinced that Ken will come back into City Hall. He perhaps has to broaden his tent. He's already said that. He needs to bring in people who are not closely associated to him and come from different political hues. He's already said that. But the important thing is, I think that Londoners are turning out for him today.
Let's turn to the man that Brian Paddock called comedy. Sean, I've got to ask you, we look at the contrast between you want to be the next generation of young Tory politicians, you grew up on a council estate, you work with disadvantaged kids, and you're voting for Boris Johnson for mayor. I mean, there's a world between you.
Not at all, because conservatism is a way of life. It's a set of principles and ideals, and Boris is modern and embodies them right now. For me, the thing about Boris is the policies. Ken turned the fight into a personal fight because he knew he couldn't win on policy. One of the big things about having a Conservative mayor or any kind of Conservative, you get a team event. It's a team event for us. If you look at the depth and the quality of Boris's policies, it's because the whole party was involved. We all gave ideas. He was willing to listen. So that, for me, reduced the distance between the likes of me and Boris to minuscule.
So when you take Boris into an inner city sink estate, what kind of reaction? I mean, you can go into those places and you make sense, right? You know the people, you know how they're living. What happens when Boris walks into one of those?
Do you know why Boris makes sense? Because he came to learn. He never pretended he knew. He said, what is it that you would like to tell me? I know this for a fact because I brought him to many. And he asked questions. And the way in which he asked the questions enabled him to understand, because there's one thing you cannot say, Boris is not silly. He is an absolutely super sharp tool, and he's learnt a lot, and he's taken that forward.
Lynn, I'm going to look at the wider picture now. Your new leader, Nick Clegg, well, I know he quite likes the number 30, but that aside, what kind of percentage is he hoping for? Because he hasn't been aiming very high.
Well, as high as possible. I mean...
Well, he was talking about 20 on Newsnight last night.
Well, I think, the Lib Dems need to hold their own, really, against... You're talking about the London battle now?
Well, no, I'm talking about the projected share for the Lib Dems. They want to come out of this in second place, presumably,
Well,
right?
and I think they will. I think tonight you will see the Lib Dems come out in second place, and I think you'll see Labour crash quite badly. So I think the Lib Dems will hold their own and maybe improve somewhat on what was a high benchmark last time in 2004, the height of the Iraq War. That was the last time we saw Labour go into third place nationally in the poll. I think you'll see the same again tonight.
David Lammy, a quick word about the London Assembly. You were on the London Assembly, and I'm aware of the inevitability of asking a black man about the position of the BNP, but that is a genuine threat this time around.
That's a real threat. I am relieved today that it looks like the turnout in London has been high. It's been high in inner London and it's been high in outer London. That would suggest that we might keep the BNP off the Assembly, but of course they only need 5%. They got 4.6 last time. It's going to be close, but all of us pray that they won't be there.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to take you over now to Tony Travers, our election supremo, who can give us a little bit of a steer on, from what we've heard tonight, Tony, do you think we can do the read across, as the traders say? Can we project what will happen here?
I think it is possible to see from these figures that have come in from the rest of the country that there has been a significant shift to the Conservatives and a small one away from Labour, and that kind of swing, certainly for the London Assembly, I think would put potentially one of the constituency seats in London under threat, and probably one of Labour's seats overall. So that could be, as it were, that what's going on in the rest of the country will feed through into the London Assembly at least. It's not quite so clear what it tells us about the mayor.
Very different voting system, though, here to the rest of the country.
Absolutely. For the mayor, you have 2 votes, first and second preference.
How many people do you think really understood the second preference vote?
I'm not sure they fully did. Once they got into the polling booth, they were then faced with papers that made them think hard, and I think many of them will have got it right on the day. But for the Assembly, you can vote for a constituency member in London and then a party, and then they sort of come up with a proportional result reflecting all the party votes but taking into account the constituency winners. So it's a complicated mixture of the two.
A quick word before we go about the mayoral candidates themselves. Ken Livingstone, we already discussed earlier, looking very solid as an incumbent, which is slightly unsettling possibly for a Londoner. Michael Portillo was saying that Boris certainly wasn't first choice for the Tories. Is that going to be a problem if he does get in?
I think if he does get in, David Cameron and the Conservative Party machine will want to discipline the kind of people he appoints and to keep a beady eye on him, frankly, to ensure that nothing can happen in London in this very high profile, here we are in City Hall, big budget institution that would feed through to national politics.
Tony Travers, thanks very much, and thanks to all my guests a little earlier. We'll be back in the City Hall with you very shortly.
The Conservatives have taken control of Bury in Greater Manchester. Here's the result. 26 councillors, they're up 3. Labour are down a net of 4. The Liberal Democrats up 1. And Manchester as a whole has been held by Labour. 61-34 Liberal Democrats. Very small change there. Liberal Democrats up 1. The Greens lose their seat.
One Conservative.
And one Conservative, which was always there. And St Albans, a Liberal Democrat gain. Liberal Democrats are up 1, Conservatives up 3 on 22, Labour on 5, down 3. So let's now, at this stage of the night, and it's 1:40 in the morning, and we've had enough of these wards in to call this election in terms of the national share of the vote, the projected national share. Remember, well, Jeremy will explain all this, but we're only talking about the way people have voted in these council elections. Jeremy.
Thank you, David. Yes, this is the big moment now. We take those local votes in this local election across part of the country and we give you percentages for parties as if people had voted across the whole country, and we call that projected national share. And we're now able to do that. Let me just show you how many of our key wards are in. We had between 900 and 1,000 key wards, nearly 70% of them in now. That means 1.5 or more million votes are behind this. And these are the percentages that will stack into our graphs in the years to come and that we'll look back on. So they're very, very significant. This is the moment. Here we go. We're going to see Labour first. How are they doing? Labour have 24%. Now, in 2004, they had their lowest ever figure, as we mentioned. It was 26, the absolute doldrums of Blair's performance in local elections. Mr Brown, far from renewing the party as was hoped, seems to have gone below that. So that will be a blow for Labour and a blow for Mr Brown. What about the Conservatives? They were on 40 last year. What now? Let's have a look. Well, the Conservatives have registered a really substantial rise on their performance last year, 44%, which is real and serious progress towards winning a general election, as they will see it. Next one, Lib Dems. Look at this. Now, 25%, 1% below their performance last year, which was 26%, which of course resulted in Ming Campbell being pitchforked out of his job. There is, though, a straw to clutch at here for the Lib Dems because they are in second place. They've actually beaten Labour with their 25%. And then the others here, 7%. So, David and your guests, there we are, the projected national share for these local elections. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. We'll talk about that with our guests, but also with Tony Lloyd MP, who's the chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party, who joins us now from the northwest. Tony Lloyd, these results that have come through and the projected national share that you've heard are a major disaster for Labour, aren't they?
It's not a good night. There's no words I can put on it that's different from that. The only thing I would say, though, is this, is that I think most Labour MPs, and in particular Labour activists in my own city, in my own constituency, knew that this was going to be a difficult election for us to fight today, a difficult time, given the amount of political noise that the government's come through in recent weeks. Now, within all that, what Labour has got to do is to recognise that the very clear signal we're getting from the public wants a Labour government that's clearly listening to what the public is saying. We've got to do that.
What does it mean the Prime Minister's got to do then?
Well, it does mean exactly what I've just said. It means that we've got to be very conscious of the fact that this isn't a general election. What these local elections tend to be is obviously affected by local issues, as they are in my own city, where in fact Labour won seats as well as lost some. But overall, we know very well what this is. It's a referendum on where the government stands.
OK, well, let's cut to the chase. You have a new Prime Minister who's chosen by the Labour Party without an election, so they're all behind him. They make this new choice. He talks about change, and the first evidence we have of how he's doing is the lowest Labour falling behind the Liberal Democrats and to the lowest figure in the popular vote they've had in tens of years. 40 years. 40 years.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think we've already agreed that this has been a very difficult night for Labour.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what does it say about the Prime Minister?
What it says about the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, like the rest of the government and like the rest of the Labour Party, has got to listen to what the public are saying. They want a government that listens to their concerns.
So they haven't been listening, you're saying?
And gets back on track and addresses the issues.
What has it not been listening to?
Well, there've been issues that we know at the moment over the 10p tax, for example. It was quite obvious on the doorstep that this is something that's hurt Labour. What the government has done is begun now to put forward a package that will minimise the impact of that. But what we've got to do is make sure we're explaining why we're doing these things and how, in the end, we'll get through this particular situation.
If it can be explained, because it was the Prime Minister as Chancellor who brought in the 10p rate that he now says is such a bad thing it's got to be scrapped.
But it was also this Chancellor who has given us probably the strongest economic position that Britain has had in many years, given the international difficulties that the world economy faces. Now, in the end, what the public will expect of this Prime Minister and of this government is that we explain clearly what the government's there for, how it intends to address the issues like the world economy, how it intends to address the issues that concern the British public, which, frankly, in areas like mine, but up and down the country, are much more about things like housing, education, the health service, to demonstrate that Labour's fitness and competence for government is as good as it has been in the past. And yes, we've got a long way to go. In those
Tony Lloyd, just stay with us a moment. Caroline Spellman is here, the Conservative Party chairman. What do you make of what Mr Lloyd's saying?
Well, I think it's much worse than the country indicating that it thinks the government isn't listening. I think it's the fact that the country doesn't trust Gordon Brown and he doesn't trust Labour anymore to run the country. I could hear Vince Cable tutting under his breath at the description of the economy being in a strong place. I mean, what we now know is we have the largest budget deficit amongst Western European nations, that actually during Gordon Brown's chancellorship, though there was much positive spin, the reality was he was creating a great big black hole in our finances. And the chickens have come home to roost. And that is very evident at this set of elections. The country has decided to speak out about its lack of trust in Labour government.
Jeff Hoon, are you hearing this, the Chief Whip for Labour? You heard what Caroline Spellman said. What do you make of it?
Yes, I did hear what she said. I don't accept that for a moment. We have a very strong economic position. We have more people in work in this country than any time in history. Clearly, there are difficult international circumstances, but the key is ensuring that Britain weathers that storm. So far, we have done remarkably well compared to other countries, and it's important that Gordon Brown, the country's most successful Chancellor of the Exchequer ever, continues to steer this country through those difficult international economic circumstances.
Have you seen the results tonight, Mr. Hoon? Have you been following these results?
The results are not great. No, yes, I have, and the results are not great. I'm here in Derby. We've lost a number of seats. We've held some seats. I wouldn't have thought, though, that David Cameron would be particularly happy about the results in Derby and indeed elsewhere in the Midlands and the North, because there's no consistency
taking
about
Bury,
the opposition.
he would be disappointed to get Bury, would he, in Greater Manchester, which at the beginning of the night Labour was saying he'd never be able to get? Will he be disappointed with having 44% share as against 24 for Labour, a gap of 20 points? Do you think he's going to be a sad man tonight? Aha. Can you hear me, Mr. Hoon? It's
Sorry,
always a
I
crucial
wasn't sure you were
moment.
directing that question to me.
What? I'm saying, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Good. I was just going to say, how disappointed is David Cameron going to be in winning Bury and in being 20 points ahead in the share of the vote tonight from Labour?
But what has happened is that, whilst I accept, clearly, people have voted against the government in a number of places across the country, they have not voted consistently for the Conservatives. Here in Derby, the Liberal Democrats have picked up seats. A large number of people, sadly, voted for the British National Party. They've picked up a seat in nearby Amber Valley, and that's quite a disturbing development, but it does demonstrate there's no consistent opposition to Labour. And what we've seen in recent local government election campaigns is that once people have to decide, make a choice as to who they want to run the country, then they have consistently supported Labour.
Tony Lloyd, just come back to you as a chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Labour down 92 on councillors, Conservatives up 100. Tessa Giles was saying the other day, and I mentioned it to her earlier this evening, a divided party is likely to lose an election, and talking about a party fighting like ferrets in a sack. Is it going to be possible to stop Labour backbenchers now turning on the government even more than they have been in recent weeks because of these results?
Well, of course, the overwhelming majority of people in the Labour Party want a Labour Party and a Labour government that has a consistency of approach, with Labour MPs supporting that Labour government. Now, that's obviously, like all things, it's a two-way process. That's most certainly the case. But what, in the end, what the public will address, and it's something that's almost the opposite of what Caroline Spellman said before. If you look up and down the country, the one big issue, the one big difficulty for the Conservative Party is that whilst you said that Labour claimed the Tories would not take Bury, I think most people expected the Tories to take Bury.
Oh no, that's not the case.
What they haven't done is demonstrated that in the north of England, when it comes to a country like Scotland, where there are no elections, significant elections tonight, the Conservatives still don't exist as a proper force.
Nick.
Now, within all that, we're not yet in a position where any Labour MP is going to concede the next election. What we're going to make sure we do is to begin to address the very real doubts and the very real concerns that the public have expressed tonight, the very real concerns that are patterned in many different ways. In Manchester, the Conservatives don't get votes.
Well, let's go to Bury and join Annabel Tiffin and have her report on what happened there. Annabel.
Well, you join us at a very empty Castle Leisure Centre in Bury, but I can assure you that just literally a few moments ago, the place was packed and there were scenes of jubilation from the Conservative Party because pretty much as expected. They got their 3 seats, as you've been discussing, to take overall control of Bury Council, and it's the first time in 21 years that they've done this, so you can imagine the scenes here. They were real scenes of jubilation. Why they've taken it, there's a number of reasons, I think, that people have been saying. Maybe a bit of disillusionment over the 21 years of Labour control, but also, I think, and this is largely what I've been hearing, it's mainly Labour apathy, that really their strong voters just weren't coming out today. It has been quite a low turnout. I was talking to Iain Lewis, the MP for Bury South earlier. He said he wasn't in the least bit worried about this, and despite the fact that Bury is actually a barometer seat usually, he was saying no, this was no indication that this was going to have any reflection on the any general election.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's have a look then at this projected national share. Just a reminder of the figures. The Conservatives on 44%, Labour on 24%, Liberal Democrats on 25%. Vince Cable, your reaction to that. Nick, you got something you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say before our guests join in, what I'm struck by
keep
is
them
how...
out.
But what I'm struck by hearing interviews there with Tony Lloyd, Jeff Hoon, with others, is there is nothing for Labour politicians to debate or talk about. Had this happened a year ago, they would have said change leaders, some of them. Had it happened only 3 weeks ago, they would have said change the 10p tax rate. Change Gordon Brown, a few might have said, or force him to change his style. What is striking is that given that Gordon Brown changed the 10p tax rate, given that he's promised to listen, in a sense there's nowhere for them to go other than to say this reflects a bad economic time, and frankly to do this, David, and to simply say we hope it gets better and we hope that the public gives us credit for weathering the storm and eventually sees that things were dealt with in a steady way. But in any other year that we have seen, results as catastrophic as this would have triggered an internal crisis within the governing party. In a sense, it's terribly striking that there is no crisis to be had because nobody's quite sure what to do.
Jeff Hoon, would you agree with that description?
Well, there is no crisis. This is not something that is going to affect the fundamental stability and indeed unity of the government. We have to go on taking the difficult decisions that the country requires.
OK. Ed Miliband, what do you make of this? I'll come to you, Vince Cable, because I said I would, but what do you make of this figure of 24%?
It's a projection, but it's clearly disappointing projection for us.
Can we cut through the words disappointing? What are you going to do about it?
I mean, I sort of don't agree with Nick, really, in the following sense.
With Nick Robinson?
With Nick Robinson. First of all, Nick, what's very important is we've got to show we can get people through very difficult economic times. And I think it was John Denham who said earlier on that people have got used to economic prosperity. Now it feels under threat because of the global economic circumstances. There's no wonder that affects the governing party. Secondly, I think we've got a very big and important mission for the future, which is going to fundamentally change people's lives in a number of different ways. We have to set that out. And thirdly, and look, this is one of the things that will be, I think, helpful for us about the Conservatives having done reasonably well tonight, is that there'll be a focus on what a Conservative government might mean. And I think when it comes to the big long-term issues of substance facing this country, I think the Conservatives have very little to say. I don't really think this is a positive vote for the Conservative tonight.
They've just been and voted for Conservative government, for Conservative local government, because in government we've demonstrated as Conservatives that we provide better value for taxpayers' money, and that we have an agenda that they like of combining a green agenda with a value for money agenda. And this is a positive choice for Conservative council. You keep shaking your head, Ed, but these were seats that were up in 2004 when we took a lot of councils from you. We've been in government 4 years. They like it. They voted for more.
You see, this goes back, David, to my point I made when William was here about ideology. You see, I genuinely think this, Caroline, which is that when we think about the problems facing Britain, whether it's the global economy, whether it's education, whether it's the health service, I think your philosophy, which is basically government should get out of the way, which is still sort of what you believe, I think that will be found wanting as we debate it over the coming months and whenever a general election is. So I quite relish that fight, actually. It will be a quite ideological fight about this country.
Vince Cable.
Well, if we've beaten Labour into third place, that will be symbolically and practically very important. And it would only be the second time we've ever done it. I mean, the last occasion was 2004, was the Iraq election, and that was very small. So that's important in itself.
Do you think you were offering anything this time, or was it just that Gordon Brown and the Labour government wasn't popular?
Well, I think if you look at some of the local results, it's clear that people like what our people have been doing in local government in some of the big northern cities where the Conservatives don't appear. I mean, you focused on Bury, which is a Manchester suburb, where actually the Conservatives were already the leading party. I mean, next door, another Manchester suburb, Oldham, is perhaps more typical of what's happening in the north, where it was very much us versus Labour, and we've made further grounds. And Hull was a big northern city where I think the Conservatives didn't feature. We made further inroads. So I think it isn't just a question of disaffection with the Labour government. We've become entrenched in many parts of local government. And for the most part, obviously there are exceptions, I think people like what we've delivered.
I thought that last year, after you'd got 26%, you got rid of your leader.
Well, that wasn't...
So now you've got 20, what was it, 25. Get rid of another leader.
No, that's not. We've made significant improvements in the last few months,
Doesn't come through in the vote yesterday.
Yes, well, I think actually you're dealing with a different mix of seats. I mean, I think it's the relative position of the parties which is important, and I think the key point is if we have beaten Labour into third place,
it's mightily down.
That will be the headline.
It's mightily down from 2004, the last time these seats were fought, isn't it? Your share.
But we've done
29% then. Now you're.
But relative to Labour, we have made improvements in our position, and I think that position that will widen because although we've been talking about the deteriorating economy, most people haven't yet felt that. I mean, there are worrying signs, but the slowdown in the economy, possible recession, hasn't yet happened, and when it does, people will be a great deal angrier than they are today.
Doug Hoyle, now Lord Hoyle, is listening to all this from Liverpool. Former Chief Whip or Whip? I can't remember, Doug. Anyway, thank you for joining us. What's your reading of all this? As somebody who now is in the House of Lords, stands a little bit outside, what would your advice be to Labour?
My advice is we've got to carry on. We've got to listen to people. We've admitted we made mistakes, and it's nothing that we can't recover from. I believe we can still go on and win the next election, but we've got to take account of what people are thinking.
Well, what are they thinking?
Well, at the moment, they're telling us that they're not too satisfied at the moment. But if you look at the economic situation, the more people in work, we've invested more in the health service, in education, and I think that we are now starting on a new phase where we are listening to people, and I believe that we can deliver the goods.
Tony, you want to say? Tony King's here, listening to you with great interest, Lord Hoyle.
Lord Hoyle, can I just press you a little bit? We've heard several people now say that what the ministers must do is listen. Well, when they've listened, when they've absorbed what people are telling them, what are they actually going to do? What's going to happen? What's going to be different about the Labour government from the way it's been for the last few months?
Well, what we've got to do, if we find something that's going wrong, like the 10p tax rate, we've got to take that into account beforehand. What we've got to do is to talk to people, to listen to them, and to act on what they're telling us. And that is what I believe we shall do. I believe that what we've seen now is not a general election. A lot of people who are Labour supporters have stayed at home. What we've got to do is to get those people out, and I believe if we can get them out, we can go on and do well in a general election. It's not a general election tonight. It's a warning to the Labour Party. But all the results aren't in. What I am saying is, yes, we've got to listen, we've got to learn from it, we've got to put our policies more vigorously with more clarity, but at the same time, we've always got to listen to people's concerns.
Lord Hoyle,
I believe if we do that, we can recover.
You've been a long, long time in the Labour Party. Have you ever known local elections as bad as this?
Absolutely.
What?
Yes, well, we've had bad times before, and we've recovered from them. But the thing is, you've not got to panic. You've got to be steady. You've got to put your policies with more clarity to the people. And as I say, most importantly of all, which I've said before, we must listen to what the people are thinking.
Okay.
If we do that, I believe we can get back on the road to success.
Isn't there an element here, Ed Miliband, of steady as she goes onto the rocks?
No, come on. I think Doug's right about
this.
this.
Well, I mean, Tony King said what policies should be changed, how should be changed. Everybody talks about just listening and listening and listening, but Tony King's asked a couple of people, in what way would you change, having listened? Nobody has an answer. I mean, do you have an answer?
But no, the thing I'd say about this, what were the policies that were at issue on the doorstep? The 10p was clearly at issue. We've discussed that. Beyond that, I did not get a sense of big anger at the government on the doorstep. I got a lot of concern, as I've said, about the economic situation and a sense of insecurity about that, and a sense that, is the government going to get us through this? Now, we've got to prove to people over the coming months, as I've said, that we can get Britain through that economic situation, because in a way it's something that people have taken for granted somewhat for the last few years, and it's now at issue.
What doorsteps were you on?
Well, I was on doorsteps in my constituency in Doncaster, and I was elsewhere as well.
I mean, many places.
Yeah.
What do you think the Prime Minister is going to do? Do you think there is... I mean, there are various things mentioned as possibilities. He might have a attempt to sort of relaunch of his premiership. He might have a change of his government. Do you think any of those things are likely?
Well, they're clearly matters for him. I'm not going to
forecast
or speculate. No, I think, look, the thing I would say is that Gordon is at his best when he's himself, because he's someone of substance. David Cameron is a smart salesman. There's no doubt about it. But Gordon is someone of substance who has deep beliefs about this country and about people in this country and how he wants to help them to make the most of their lives. He's at his best when he's talking about those things, and that's what I think he'll be doing over the coming weeks and months.
There's a danger of Labour losing all the votes of all salesmen throughout the United Kingdom.
I was just about to say that.
You talk about shallow. The Prime Minister talked about shallow salesmen.
That was a really cheap jibe yesterday, and of course all politicians.
But maybe
true,
come on, Caroline. Come on.
It's that kind of point scoring that really turns the public.
Come on.
It does. It does turn people.
Even David Cameron admitted this week that he had failed to end Punch and Judy politics. So come on.
Every politician has to sell the policies that they stand for on the doorstep, but also a leader has to bring about change within an organisation. Now, getting change in an organisation is one of the most difficult things to do. And what David Cameron has managed to do with the Conservative Party is bring about wholesale change within the party. And I think that David Dimbleby's point about what are you going to change now? Because, in essence, we know Gordon Brown. We've had him as Chancellor for a very long time. Now we see some of the damage that's done
He's been a very successful Chancellor, as David Cameron admitted at the weekend.
But the changes that the country needs now can only be delivered by a party that knows how to change, and David Cameron has delivered the change.
Can I just come in for
Vince Cable is falling asleep listening to this stuff.
Yes. Well, I think if I can try to be neutral between these warring parties, I mean, what is going to happen to the Conservatives, and as a result of what is obviously a very good night for them, is they are going to be subject to much closer scrutiny on the policy front. I mean, Cameron has done well in improving the image. They're no longer perceived to be nasty in the way that was clearly the case some years ago. So, yes, I mean, there has been an advance in professionalism and presentation of image. But on policy, particularly hard areas like economic policy, where it's a bit vague, to say the least, I think they're going to be subject to much tougher scrutiny as been the case.
Can I just tell you the news that you've lost Liverpool?
I think we expected to lose ground.
But you've lost it. And there were two counts, apparently. One had 15 votes ahead of Labour. I don't understand that. And one 7 votes ahead of Labour. That must be one councillor, I suppose.
Well, we're still substantially the largest
We've gained 3 seats by the look of it.
On the third recount, you've lost Liverpool. Here are the figures for Liverpool, and you've also lost Pendle. Let's just look at those figures for a moment. Liberal Democrats are still indeed the... Oh, wait a minute, Liverpool's gone through and out, has it? OK. Pendle lost control. Liberal Democrats on 20, they're down 8 overall. Conservatives up 2. Don't be confused by these larger seats. Liverpool is still the largest seats, largest number of councillors in Liverpool. Pendle, Conservatives are up 2. Labour's up 4 in Pendle. The BNP gain 1. And Colchester, the Conservatives lose control of Colchester. This is an old one we've had in before. Is it down 5, Liberal Democrats up 4.
So you've got good
and up 1 for Labour. So that's out of the pattern. And Oxford remains a hung council. Labour on 23, and Labour gain 4 overall in Oxford. The Liberal Democrats gain 1. Conservatives have no representation. They're down 2. The Greens are down 1. We were saying earlier that all these bits of the country that the politicians will be looking at in detail, they're showing there a variety, aren't they, Tony, of
yes, and as years have gone by, the number of councils that go against the trend one way or another has gradually increased. Local voters show every sign, first, of not being as wedded to the national parties as they used to be, but secondly, of being conscious of what's going on locally. But in other words, the story tonight is of one big picture, but with little bits that one can pick out and discuss if one wants to. The Conservatives have failed to pick up a remarkable number of places that I would have thought they would. Gosport, Worcester, Cheltenham, that happens. And it's happening more and more. But my goodness, the big picture is very big tonight.
David, can I come in?
Well, the big picture, we can come back in a second, but the big picture is very much the picture of Mr. Brown, which Jeremy Vine has for us. Jeremy.
Well, I thought, I'm keeping my voice down here because we're in the gallery, I thought we should return to that progression that Vince Cable suggested some weeks, months back, of Stalin to Mr. Bean, and see where tonight has left the leader who began being compared to someone who was in command of all he surveyed. What were the polls saying at this point? 44% at the beginning. And do you remember the response on terrorism and foot and mouth, and how Mr. Brown was praised almost as if this extraordinary thing had just jumped clear of all the problems that Tony Blair had. But it didn't work out like that. The Conservatives launched their inheritance tax policy, and Mr. Brown cancelled the snap election, and there he is looking a bit exhausted, and this was the beginning of the problems, and almost broke with that moment in the polls where the bounce was evident. And then we're wondering whether we've got a politician or a comedian here. Suddenly Mr. Brown is looking a bit like Rowan Atkinson, certainly too much for his MP's comfort, I should think. 35%. These are polls just in the last 8 months showing this progression, everything seeming to go wrong, lost data discs and Northern Rock and the 10p tax mess and so on. And we ended up wondering whether he had become Mr. Bean at the end of the sequence here. Is that the Prime Minister on the wall up there as a result of all this? So we'll look at the numbers again and see how this projected national share that we're showing fits in with the last 10, 11 years, going right back to 1997, 44% of the vote. These are percentages in the general election, this one, 44%. That was the landslide. And then coming down for the locals, 29% for Tony Blair and Labour in 2000, up again to win the 2001 general election with 42%. And here we are with this figure. We're agreeing that, what was it, that Ed was in at play school when it was ever as bad as this, sometime in the 60s. 26%, 2004, the worst for Labour in about 40 years. That was Mr. Blair. And then back up to win the general in 2005. Important to remember that they recovered to win general election. And then final Tony Blair performance in an election was those locals last year, 27%. They just came off the bottom for that. So we asked this simple question: would Mr. Brown do worse than Labour's worst in living memory? Would he go below Tony Blair's lowest, below 26%? Let's add on 2008, and there it is, the 24% that will be much discussed. An abject failure for Labour in these local elections, a disastrous result for Mr. Brown's newish government, and the suggestion there that he isn't Brown anymore. We will try to bring over the Bean picture and say as gently as we can, Mr. Brown, you've gone from Stalin to Mr. Bean.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. We go to Liverpool now and join David Woodthorpe, our reporter there. David, I gather that though we were saying a moment ago that the Liberal Democrats had lost no real control, there are all kinds of shenanigans afoot to try and regain control, even after the votes have been counted. What's happening?
Well, there's a classic piece of horse trading going on here. Labour may have had a bad night across the rest of the country. They've had a good night here. They picked up 4 seats. The Greens have picked up the seat. The Lib Dems have lost 5. That takes it to no overall control. But the Liberal Democrat council leader here, Warren Bradley, has signed up an independent, a former Labour councillor called Nadia Stewart. She's taken the Liberal Democrat whip just as the votes have been counted. So in effect, that gives the Lib Dems overall control again. So based on the vote, it's hung. But based on who people are signed up for, this is back with a majority Liberal Democrat control.
How do people explain this? I mean, you stand and within, actually at the count, you switch sides?
Well, this particular councillor wasn't actually standing, so of course it's up by thirds. So this was a councillor that wasn't up for election this time, but she'd already stepped down from the Labour Party and gone independent. And so, in a sense, you might say she was up for grabs, and she's been grabbed, she's been signed up, and she's part of the Lib Dem team here. So, I mean, the remarkable thing about Liverpool is it's bucked to the national trend as it so often does. And despite this being the European capital of culture this year, you'd have thought it'd be a rock-solid place for the Lib Dems. It hasn't been, because they've been rated the worst council in the country, because they've had problems in getting that capital culture year up and running, and they've paid that penalty, but ultimately they've done a trade and they've hung on after the votes have been counted.
What do you think they offered her?
I think we'll find out in a few minutes here in the Northwest what was offered to her, but I think they've offered her a home. I think you've got to bear in mind it's quite lonely being an independent councillor, particularly if you're a member of a large group like the Labour group, left there and became an independent. I mean, you know, many politicians like to be part of a bigger team, and at this stage I can't say whether she's been offered a portfolio within the local government here, within the council. That I can't tell you. All I can tell you is she's signed up and she's part of that Lib Dem group of councillors now.
Well, David, it's a lovely story. Thank you very much indeed. Among the critics of Labour we've been talking about this evening, Charles Clarke is certainly probably the most outspoken in his attacks on Gordon Brown, talking about the abolition of the 10p tax rate, the post office closures, and how many MPs were disappointed by policy decisions. Well, here is Charles Clarke's reaction tonight to the results that have come in so far.
We've really got to focus on how we win and what we do. And these are a real message to us from the electorate saying we don't like some of the things we've seen, you've got to get your act together. And that's a message we have to receive and act upon.
It's no secret that you are critical of Gordon Brown. Do you think you can win under him?
I think it's possible, but it would require changes. We have to set out our policy very clearly. He has to get a team which is right. We have to send our message and our purpose in a more convincing way than we have done so far.
A team which is right, Ed Miliband.
Well, I agree with some of what Charles has said. He said we've got to set out what our agenda is in a clear and convincing way. I think that's absolutely right. One thing I want to go back to...
A team which is right, he said.
Look,
if the team is right?
I think we've got a very good team, yes.
You disagree with him on that? No changes?
Well, as I said earlier, it's for the Prime Minister to decide who's in his team. But I think we've got a good team of people. I think we need to use people from across the Labour Party. I think that's what we're doing. Look, I want to go back to something which
if I may,
yeah.
I don't think Charles Clarke is saying that he thinks the team is right. I mean, he's clearly signalling that important changes are needed. I think Charles Clarke is not suggesting the junior ranks of the cabinet.
No, what do you think?
I think what he's saying is that at the very top of the cabinet, people are not performing in a way that will reassure the public. Now, he's not said it. And maybe he doesn't mean it, but I suspect he has in mind people like the Chancellor Alistair Darling, the Home Secretary Jackie Smith, need to either get a much higher profile to be reassuring or, frankly, to be replaced.
What likelihood do you think there is of a reshuffle?
Well, the indications ahead of these elections was there would be no immediate reshuffle, in part because Tony Blair tried that after disastrous local election results and it never worked for him. They were usually botched reshuffles and they did little to restore his popularity. In the medium term, though, Gordon Brown will have to think if he is playing long, which he surely must now be doing for a general election, perhaps as late as 2010, is there one more chance to change his team to try and get a team that is more reassuring, more able to take the battle to the Tories?
Tony?
I think the Labour government has a real problem here, which we haven't really talked about, and it's not clear, as Nick was saying a few moments ago, how you address it. There are grave doubts amongst very large numbers of people as to the government's competence, its ability to handle the affair. You used the metaphor earlier on of the ship being steered onto the rocks, but most people think it's being steered onto the rocks in a very wavery kind of uncertain way. As Ed Miliband was suggesting, there's no sense of direction. People don't quite know what this government is about, what it stands for, where it's going. It's supposed to be an anti-poverty government, and yet gets into trouble over specifically a poverty issue. There's a real sense of not knowing what these people are about. Ed Miliband was saying a moment ago that you didn't know what a Tory government would be like, but people don't know what a Labour government is like at the moment. They don't know why it's there, what it's for. Hence all this talk of listening. I wanted to ask Doug Hoyle, he said we'll listen and we'll talk to the people, but what will they say? I mean, Ed Miliband probably knows. I hope he does.
Well, looking very surprised.
No, not surprised. No. What I would say to you about that is that what we stand for is using the power of government to help people solve some of the problems they see in their own lives. Whether it's, I talked about this earlier, whether it's caring for elderly relatives and the pressures people face in that respect, whether it's wanting GPs opening at the time they need them, whether it's getting on the housing ladder. Now, where you're right, Tony, is that events, and we can name some of them that have happened over the last few months, get in the way of being able to project that. And we obviously have to do better at projecting that message. All of us have to raise our game to do that. But I think that's something very much we can do. And as I said earlier also, I think there will be a focus now on the choice between the Conservatives and Labour. And that is a contrast that we relish, because when it comes to these big issues of substance in the country, I don't think they have answers.
I think it's significant that on the Newsnight poll tonight, when the public were asked about things like which party do you think has the better team then, they came down overwhelmingly to say that Conservative parties, to them, seems to have the better team now for government. And in a factor of 2 to 1, 60% of people said they thought that the Labour Party was more divided than the Conservative Party. So people are making those choices and they're expressing them clearly in the polling.
Not a Newsnight poll, it was our poll.
Your poll.
You know how jealous the BBC is of anybody else in the BBC.
I do apologise.
I have to say, I think, Caroline, you sound extremely, I mean, if I may say so, you sound extremely complacent, I would say, about these results.
No.
I mean,
I'm not complacent.
You are quite complacent, I think.
Could I just come on that? I'm not complacent because my party's had to rebuild itself with change. And the fact that you accuse me of that tells me you're not listening to what people are saying to you. You need to listen.
Okay,
Say you want to, try it.
We'll leave the tutorial. Tories teach Labour how to win elections, and we've had a lot of results, and we know the overall picture is poor for Labour. But as we were saying earlier on, it does vary in different parts of the country. So let's now go to different parts of the country where you're watching and hear what's been happening there.
Well, I understand you might be expecting from us a little bit of Tory crowing, and we've got a couple of Tory crows here, and Polly Toynbee as well, Michael Portillo, you'll remember, and Fraser Nelson from The Spectator. Let me take to you first, Michael. A very, very positive outcome for the Conservatives on the national share, projected national share.
Yes, although, I mean, 44%, although it's better than the Tories have done recently, is not particularly spectacular for an opposition that's on its way to winning a general election. And I think the Tories ought to be hoping for better than that. I think the really spectacular thing this evening, actually, is the Labour share at 24%, which is really quite unusual for an opposition to sink that low. But for the Tories to feel confident of winning the next general election, I think they'd want to be higher than that. They'd want to be consistently at a higher number in opinion polls as well as in local elections.
When people were talking about, Labour at 47 in 95, the Tories were throwing out their hands and saying, don't be ridiculous, it's just not going to happen. Isn't this pretty much as good as it would get for them? I don't know why I'm trying to convince you a Tory, but,
Well, I'm a broadcaster like you, actually, but I'm trying to be dispassionate about this. I think the Tories need to have a higher number than the number they're scoring today. This number is good because it's better than what they've had before, but they've not been getting the sort of numbers that Labour got in opposition before Labour became the government. And given that the Tories need to get a much higher percentage to be certain of winning than Labour needs to get to be certain of winning, then the Tories will need to get higher than this to be really comfortable about the next election.
Polly, if that is the most spectacular number tonight, Labour on 24, what has gone wrong? Is this all the 10p tax still?
10p tax certainly gave Labour a huge extra blow. It was destined to do badly tonight anyway. 24 is very bad. It's the worst since records began. And Labour's going to have to go away and do a very serious rethink, and I'm sure they will try.
But I mean, this was what he tried to avoid by climbing down when he did, and yet it seems to have compounded it.
I don't think it's compounded it. He climbed down a bit too late. The mistake was so serious that there was no way out of it, and he should have acknowledged and apologised much earlier. Now he's got to find a fix for it. I think he's got to find a way of taking all of those low-paid people out of tax and taxing the rich more to pay for it. But I don't know if he'll have the guts.
It's quite interesting, Fraser. I was just listening to Caroline Spellman talking about the Labour Party having to listen more to people, and this extraordinary idea of the Conservatives now teaching Labour possibly how to win an election. Have we really got to that?
Well, it does look so, actually. I mean, I've seen the Labour faces, we haven't heard their voices. They all look terrible. Ed Miliband looks like he's seen a ghost. I think they appreciate there's a turning point tonight. As Michael says, this is not enough for the Conservatives to say the next election is ours, but I think it is enough for a lot of Labour MPs to work out thinking this is our worst election, probably since the war, in terms of the share of the votes, and we probably are. It's now probable that they will lose the next election.
What does this do to the mayoral contest then? We're in City Hall, we're in the living room.
We are.
Who's going to be here tomorrow?
Oh, I think Boris Johnson is going to win, and by a reasonable degree as well. That appears to be everything. And just think if you're Gordon Brown, you will now live in a constituency represented by Liberal Democrats, in a country governed by the Scottish National Party, and work in a city governed by the Conservatives. It's a terrible morale blow for Gordon Brown. And I don't think there's any way Boris can lose it now, unless London has gone hugely against the polls in the rest of the country. London is now Conservative, and what a blow for Brown.
And I'm going to come back to that point you made earlier, which is, at this point, the Conservatives, the Camerons and the Osbornes of this world are biting their nails and saying, hang on, how on earth did this happen? We've got Boris in charge.
Yeah, I mean, Boris is a pretty unreliable person. So how exactly he's going to manage the city, I don't know. He's also, it seems to me, the converse of the image that the Tories actually want. I mean, the Tories have spent the last 2 years trying to modernise, and Boris doesn't strike me as a modernising figure at all. You know, he's a kind of throwback to all sorts of traits that actually they don't want to associate with Toryism. So I think it is a double-edged sword, but of course there's no doubt at all that the Tories wanted to win London, needed to win London, and I agree with Fraser, have won London.
And would you accept that? Do you think Ken is now pretty much out of the race? I mean, when you've looked at Ken on the campaign trail this time round and the allegations that have accompanied him, whether you think that's kind of media bias or not?
The allegations have been outrageous. London only has one newspaper, the Evening Standard. It has behaved absolutely disgracefully. It hasn't behaved like a newspaper at all. It's plastered all of its billboards all over London outside, every tube station with Ken's scandal. Mostly stories that haven't been taken up by anybody else because they were
I know they're
paper
still being
thin.
investigated, but in terms of what it has done to him as a candidate, do you think it has worn him down?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily worn him down, but I'm sure it will have diminished the vote he would have had. But I think if Labour really is on 24%, he'd have struggled an awful lot to win anyway. He'd have had to buck the trend enormously. And the truth is, it's probably going to be a very sad, bad day for Ken.
A point about the Lib Dems. Nick Clegg was saying last night in that way that they all downgrade expectations. Oh, 20 would be nice. And we know that Nick Clegg rather likes the number 30, but, you know, 25 would probably be... I think we can. But going back to the projected national share, I guess 25 would be a nice note for them.
Especially if it's one more than Labour's on 24. If Liberal Democrats finish second tonight, this is great for Nick Clegg. He expected to do pretty badly because, don't forget, 4 years ago, they were winning anti-war votes of Labour. They expected those votes to go back. It seems Lib Dems have held on to it. This, against all expectations, is actually quite a good night for Nick Clegg.
Okay.
Silver's pretty good.
Fraser Nelson and Mike Portillo. Holly Toynbee, thank you all very much indeed. That's all from us here at City Hall.
The result from Birmingham. Now, nobody could take Birmingham. It's too divided. But here are the results from Birmingham. It's still a hung council. The Conservatives, an overall gain of 6. Labour, overall down 6. Liberal Democrats on 32, no change. And Respect Party is up 1. The party George Galloway founded. Hastings in East Sussex, a hung council, Conservatives on 15, up 1, Labour up 1, and the Liberal Democrats down 2. Amber Valley, the Conservatives hold on to Amber Valley, they go up 1, Labour overall down 3, and the BNP gain 2 seats in Amber Valley. And Anglesey or Innismorn, a hung council. It's the first Welsh council we've had in, I think, tonight. Plaid Cymru up 2. Labour up 5. The Conservatives up 1. Liberal Democrats up 1. and others down 9. But there are still 23 others, whoever the others are, independents.
Result we all like.
In Wales, the independents are... Significant. I don't know, who are the independents in Wales? Do you claim them as Conservatives?
So I think what's very interesting at this election is the number of independents in Wales who have actually declared themselves as Conservatives. And
But a lot of people always suspected independents were really Conservatives.
Well, you can understand that. You know, think of the Labour heartlands and the valleys. It was difficult because our party's rehabilitated. It gets easy to get off the fence and say you're really a Conservative.
I think a quarter or something of councillors in Wales are independent.
And that's one of the reasons we've been able to field more candidates also at this election in Wales than ever before. It's a restoration.
It's been a sort of undercover movement of the Conservative Party in Wales.
Well, it works.
Jeremy.
Yes, thank you, David.
Rejoin us through the snowstorm.
Yeah, here we are. It's blowing a gale. Well, the snow's not really moving considering the wind in the studio, but it's cold in here. And I was mentioning earlier, what did you have this in your classroom wall at school? The ascent of man, how ape gradually moved up to become Homo erectus, man standing tall and straight. And we were just asking, weren't we, whether that is somehow the story of the Conservative progression. If we look back at John Major in 1995... Get right down here. There he was on a very low share in those local elections, 26%. And gradually you see these Conservative leaders straightening up. The next one there, William Hague, 1998, 33%. Still, though, with that stoop, that needs a bit of therapy there on the spine, I think. IDS, Ian Duncan Smith, 2002, there he is, not straight enough to win a general election, 35%, walking taller, but not quite there. And the same was true, wasn't it, of Michael Howard? Yes, Howard, 38%, thought he might win the general in 05, but didn't. So now we come to the end of the progression and to David Cameron. And in a sense, he was ascended already because he had that 40%, that magic number, last year and the year before in the local elections. We were asking what would happen tonight. He might be worried, go below that would be a serious reverse. Even staying at 40 might have been seen as them treading water. Well, that hasn't happened. Here is the new percentage for the Conservatives, our projected national share tonight, 44%, a truly fabulous result for them, which leaves Mr. Cameron standing alone. And behind him, all the other leaders that Labour knocked over. Oh, back to you.
You have such fun there, Jeremy.
I know.
You're a lucky man. And we sit here talking statistics. We're joined by Professor John Curtis of Strathclyde University, I hope. John, we've been looking at your figures.
Hello, David.
Hello. Well, it's been an interesting night for you because normally all the politicians leap on your figures and start complaining because it doesn't show it quite the way they'd like to see it. Tonight, everybody seems to have been happily accepting, or not happily, but anyway, accepting them.
Yes, indeed. Well, of course, it is a very, very clear result. I mean, I think perhaps the most important thing to say is that the opinion polls have been suggesting over the last couple of months or so that the Conservatives were now in a stronger position than at any time since Black Wednesday back in September 1992. Now we have a set of local election results which are also the best for the Conservatives since 1992, when the local elections took place just after the general election. So we now have the opinion polls and the ballot box telling the same story. It's not a story, of course, that means the Conservatives are bound to win the next election, but it is a story that says that the Conservatives are now seriously more popular than they have been at any time since the disaster of Black Wednesday, which broke the back of John Major's government.
What about the Liberal Democrats?
Well, I think Liberal Democrats in the end, as it were, I heard some of your earlier discussion about whether Labour had fallen into third or the Liberal Democrats had gained second. I think my view is, frankly, the Labour Party has fallen into third place and they've just simply overtaken the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats for that slot, rather than the Liberal Democrats doing particularly well. If you look at the votes for the Liberal Democrats tonight and compare it ward by ward with what they achieved last year, they're down a little bit, not a lot, but certainly the percentage point or so that our projected national share suggests does seem to be right. So it's actually a little bit worse for the Liberal Democrats so far as votes are concerned as compared with last year. But of course, they're able to pick up seats from Labour because Labour are doing so badly, and that compensates for the losses they're suffering to the Conservatives.
But their share of the vote, then, if you go back to 2004, the Liberal Democrat vote goes 29, 28, 27, 26, 25. this year?
It does indeed, yes. The Liberal Democrats are on a gentle slide. And the truth is that tonight does nothing to reverse the impression that the Liberal Democrats are on a gentle slide down from the post-Iraq war high.
Can that be recovered, do you think, Vince Cable?
Well, almost certainly so. And as I said earlier, I mean, I think the fact that we've actually overtaken Labour is psychologically and politically very important.
But
and
John Curtis just says it's not by your deeds that you've overtaken Labour, but by Labour's misdeeds that they've fallen behind you.
Well, I
It's
think
nothing
we
to do with
acknowledge
you.
the fact that in 2004 we were at a peak and we capitalised on the fact that we'd made the right judgment about the Iraq war and captured the public mood at the
When
time.
you say you were at a peak, you mean that's it?
No, we're going to get back to that, but certainly over the last few years we've struggled to maintain that level. But I think if you look at particular areas, we've done exceptionally well in areas where we've got held MP seats. So if you look at, for example, Colchester, that was against the trend, you've got Rochdale, you've got Cheltenham, where we're up against the Tories.
Does it do any good picking out these particular examples
it
when
does,
the overall
because
picture's
last year
not
we
so
had,
good?
by every count, you know, a bad night. But actually, if you went to the seats which were held by Lib Dem members of Parliament, we're actually doing extremely well. I mean, Eastleigh was a good example. We won almost all the council seats. We had a sitting MP with Chris Huhne with a majority of under 1,000.
Portsmouth,
and I think
didn't succeed.
I think you'll find that
No,
across the
stop,
board
Steve,
we've
it's
done
okay.
extremely well in those areas where we were strong and have built
Yes.
a reputation for competence.
Okay. Nick, you had your hand there first, then I'm continuing.
The great anxiety, I think, for Liberal Democrats, and Vince Cable may choose to agree or disagree with this, is that traditionally, as Labour has fallen back,
It's okay,
this is
Steve,
over a
it's
period of
okay.
decades, often the Liberal Democrats have struggled a little bit as well. Now, if in addition to that historical fact, you add the fact that they now haven't found a new cause after the Iraq war and they're on their third leader now, and that hasn't done the trick, it is not a crisis for them by any stretch of the imagination, but they are having to sit and think, well, now what do we do? What is it? We can't change leader again. There isn't an obvious policy solution at the moment. It's long, hard graft, delivers in certain areas, as Vince Cable has said, but not in others, and it is nothing like the success that they enjoyed a few years ago.
Tony?
Two thoughts, David. One is simply, Vince Cable alluded to this, and it's true. If you look at the projected national share of the vote for the Lib Dems over the last few years, it looks like this: 2004, 29, 2005, 28, 2006, 27, 2007, 26, 2008, 25. It doesn't look terribly healthy from the Liberal Democrats' point of view. One other thought that I think ought to be brought to the fore is very serious for Labour. If you look at the elections of 97, 2001, 2005, the Labour Party benefited hugely in terms of number of seats by tactical voting, with very large numbers of people who would probably otherwise have voted Liberal Democrat, opting instead to vote Labour where the Liberal Democrats had no chance. The opinion polls, and this hasn't been picked up widely, are now suggesting that Liberal Democrats in similar situations where the Lib Dem candidate locally has no chance are much more evenly divided. And a lot of the projections that are offered, votes to seats, simply go on the assumption that the future will be like the past, that tactical voting will go on benefiting Labour. I think it's going to benefit the Labour Party very little at the next election and could even harm the Labour Party with people moving away from it.
Let me just, we've got been joined by Ian Gibson, the Labour MP for Norwich. Mr Gibson, you may have heard some of the things people have been saying from your party about the need to listen. What's your message to Gordon Brown in the light of these results?
Well, it's quite clear that we've been pushed around, particularly over the issue of the 10p income tax. That did resonate with people on the doorstep. We've done quite a bit of canvassing here in Norwich over the last few weeks, and we've been hearing it time and time again. The parties, our opposition parties, used it in their last-minute leaflets to try and make sure that we were discredited and so on. And it obviously has bitten to some extent. But having said that, in Norwich here, the Labour Party still is overall control in a sort of hung local council. The Greens have moved prominently into second place, 2 seats behind Labour, and have now become a force, whilst the Liberal Democrats here in Norwich have more or less crumbled.
What's the lesson for the government?
Well, the message is that there are specific things that you must get hold of in the way that we did with the 1997 pledges. We've got to do things like the railways. Should we be talking about nationalisation of them again? Should we be thinking about care for the elderly? What about, you know, the agency workers and having the full trade union rights as other people in this country do? And issues like that ring deeply, I think, in the population. And of course, there's the whole business of minimum wages, pensioners, getting the relation back to salaries and wages, which was taken away by the Conservatives, but has not fully been restored yet, and really needs to be done now.
Can Gordon Brown capture the imagination of the electorate, do you think, in time for an election?
Well, the message is there for him to do it. We're there to help him. If he's listening, then, you know, he must come and tell us right away that despite all the bad mistakes in the last few weeks over the taxes, that we can get it right again. It's a real challenge. We deserve to be there. We've done so many good things, and we can carry on doing that. We must get the positive messages over.
Is he capable of doing that?
Is he up for it? Yes. Yes, I do think he is. I think he's got a new team of advisors there. They really need to get their act together to learn what people are saying. Come out on the doorstep and listen to what people are saying in this country. Don't get stuck, you know, in the box of Whitehall and Westminster. It really would do them good to come and hear what's going on and to react to that and to give the people something that, you know, gives them a life, you know, which is exciting, enthusiastic, and for the young people of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Nick?
Thank you.
The Norwich brothers does he listen to? Because on the one hand, Charles Clarke pops up, MP for Norwich, and says that what he has to do is listen to me. He has to change his team, and the implication is move in a more Blairite direction. On the other, Ian Gibson pops up and says, no, you should listen to me. You should give people more in the way of minimum wage and so on. We're here to help, says one of the most serial rebels in the House of Commons, who votes against his party as often as he possibly can. Not the sort of help I suspect that Gordon Brown will embrace all that enthusiastically. Okay. But everyone will now believe that they uniquely have a view about how Gordon Brown should rescue it, and that makes his job hard.
You think it's going to be anarchy in the Labour Party, do you?
No, anarchy's stated much too strongly, but I do think he will be pulled now by people in the Labour Party saying, well, actually, we really know what you should do, and you don't. You admitted you got it wrong on 10p tax, and that will make it hard for him to have a steady course.
People have overlooked the fact that huge numbers of people now think the Labour Party is divided, and I mean that to be taken very seriously. The last poll that asked people whether the Labour Party was united or divided, the proportion who said that they thought the party was united was 7%. 7.
United?
7% of people, they must have just come back from holiday in Kenya or Australia or somewhere, thought the Labour Party was united, and those figures are exactly the same as they were when the Labour Party was led, if that's the right term, by Michael Foot in the early 1980s. That's serious. I happen not to believe that the Labour Party is divided in the way that very large numbers of people do, but it's public perceptions that matter.
Okay. Let's have a look at a result we've had in from Thurrock, and this stays hung. 24 Conservative, no change. 22 Labour, no change. The BNP up 1. That should have been a seat the Conservatives took. Thurrock in Essex.
Yeah.
Right, and let's go and find... Well, the new word for the grassroots seems to be the bloggers, who are meant to have their ear to the ground. God knows whether they do, but anyway... They're with Emily Maitlis. Let's join them.
Hello, yes, I'm back with my bloggers, ear to the ground or not. There is some breaking news from each of our bloggers who tell us this is the heaviest night's traffic that they've had in a single go. But it does seem that the mood, the sort of traffic is now starting to slow down a little bit. We've had the projected national share, lots of chatter and Twitter and stuff about that. As you can imagine, we'll have a little bit more on that in a moment. But first I'm going to take you to our Labour activist, Luke Akehurst, who said just a moment ago, and I quote, "This is the dangerous bit where I now start to destroy my political career." Do let us help you, Luke. What are you writing?
Thanks for that. Well, I was going to write a more reflective piece because I've been doing, talking up some of the good results Labour's had in places like Liverpool and Oxford, but it'd be foolish to pretend this hasn't been a difficult night, and a lot of councillors have lost their seats, and that's a great shame. And I think we need to think about why that's happened. To my mind, we were heading for quite a good set of results until the 10p issue really started to hit home in people's pay packets in April, and that's a completely self-inflicted wound, and so it's a great shame.
So what are you writing now that you think will destroy it? Because actually, talking about the 10 pence tax is no different to most of the Labour rebels, right?
Yeah, the difference I would have with Labour rebels is that I think the New Labour brand isn't necessarily solid. That actually the public like the combination of economic efficiency and tough on crime and social justice that New Labour stands for. It's just the 10p thing made them think that actually maybe we'd lost sight of the social justice element of that, and we need to get back to the fundamentals of what it was that won us 3 general elections.
Alix Mortimer, you are nodding very sagely, like a nodding sage Lib Dem. Go on, tell us what you've
the Lib Dems were, of course, the only party to notice the 10p problem last year when the budget came out. And to vote against it. Well,
but in terms of what you're kind of writing now and what your feel is, you must be pretty happy with where you're sitting now.
Extremely
you're
happy.
Above Labour.
Yes, we're above Labour. We are now apparently the second party in the country. It's fantastic news. We haven't, as far as I can see, we've held about steady. We're on about net -3 or something last time I looked. So we've held it steady. We had great results
now?
in 2004.
You said this was the heaviest night's traffic you'd had.
Yes.
It was fantastic. I won't ask how many, because that might just kill it all for us.
It was less than a tenth of Iain Dale's traffic on a normal day.
It's not size that counts, Alex.
Absolutely.
We're going to have the projected national share of our bloggers blogging soon, aren't we? But Alex, just take us through a couple of comments.
Well, everyone's sort of getting, like Luke says, everyone's getting more reflective. Someone on Lib Dem Voice is sort of wondering whether Conservative Home, which is the sort of Conservative hub, although it's not an official party site, Conservative Home have called it for Boris, as I think Iain blogged earlier, called Boris for mayor. And Lib Dem Voice, people are wondering whether that was wise, might they look a little bit silly? So that's sort of one thing that's going on. Okay. Someone else has summed up a good. This is how the night has been for Labour. Poor Gordon. He lives in a Lib Dem constituency. His country is governed by the SNP, and his city is about to go Conservative.
I think that's what Fraser Nelson said to me a minute ago. Iain, is there any Tory crowing by any chance?
I think people are trying not to crow, but obviously I think this is probably the best Conservative night since 1968 when there was another Labour wipeout. So there's a lot of very happy people on sites like Conservative Home. But a lot of people are questioning what the Tories would have to do to satisfy Michael Portillo, because we've been hearing the interviews that he's done with you, and he clearly lives on a different planet to the rest of us.
Well, he doesn't, to be fair, call himself a
book.
Tory anymore. He calls himself a broadcaster.
Well, he should remember the party that made him, perhaps, because it's really weird when he says, 44% isn't good enough. He must be the only Tory in the country that thinks that.
But what are the Tories doing now? I mean, David Cameron's gone to bed happy, presumably. Are your guys tailing off now? Is this where you get reflective?
Yeah, I mean, people are obviously moving away. I suspect your viewing figures are probably declining at the moment too. And I think people their minds are turning to tomorrow and what's going to happen in London, because frankly, that result will eclipse anything that's happened tonight, because if the Conservatives win that, it's a clean sweep.
It is the biggest story in town, isn't it? Thank you all very much. We'll let you know as soon as Luke tells us if he has in fact destroyed his political career or not. It could take another hour. We'll bring it to you live.
Thanks very much, Emily. Well, now, let's just have a look at what we've got in here. Conservative, Norwich Council, Hung Council, Labour on 15. The figures have absolutely vanished from my screen. I suppose they have from... We haven't got it.
Can I say something about Norwich, just to fill in, because it's a very interesting place. The Greens are now the official opposition. They are the second party on the Norwich City Council. They've gained 3 seats. They now have 13. The Liberal Democrats have gone down 5 and have only 6. So this is, I think, I'm doing this from memory, the only council in the country that has a Green party as one of the 2 top parties.
Here are the figures now. Labour on 15. The Greens overall gain 3. The Liberal Democrats lose 5 in Norwich, and the Conservatives are up 2. That's the message from Norwich. And I hope we might be able to show you the gains and losses there have been so far in councils. Conservative gains we have here. Harlow, Nuneaton and Bedworth, which was taken control from Labour. West Lindsey from the Liberal Democrats. Southampton and Harlow both from no overall control. And here are another 4. Elmbridge, Wyre Forest, Maidstone and Bury, all of which were no overall control, are now Conservative administrations. And one loss, Colchester, that goes to no overall control. And Labour losses, Nuneaton and Bedworth, of course, the Conservatives, and Hartlepool goes to no overall control. And the Liberal Democrats gain control of Hull from no overall control and St Albans. And they've lost control, well, we're not sure about Liverpool because of all the shenanigans, but anyway, Pendle certainly lost in overall control, and West Lindsey straight to the Conservatives. So those are the Liberal Democrat positions. Let's, you haven't seen this, Vince, I don't think. Jeremy Vine telling the Liberal Democrat story. You have to see it. Jeremy.
David, I'm going to spare you the Texan accent. Hi, we're in the saloon bar. And here I am, ready to shoot some cans off the counter, and I won't inflict the accent that alarmed all those Lib Dem bloggers so much. But look at 2004 here. I hope this gun is going to work. I shot straight earlier on. Nick Clegg, I hope you're watching this. Have a look. Okay, 29% 2004. The leader then, of course, Charles Kennedy. He then led the party into the general election where they scored 23%, and then in 2007, last year, this was the local election score. I'll see if I can shoot this one off the counter as well. Good, 3 in a row, 26%. Okay, Nick Clegg, let's have a look at you. We've got the Lib Dem leader here in his cowboy leathers. He's in the saloon bar, and you can see that there's one tin can left there, which says 2008. See if you can knock that one off, Mr. Clegg. And he's missed. And it says 25% there. And that, as we have been saying, is worse than Ming Campbell. And you start to wonder if this town might become a slightly dangerous place for the Liberal Democrat leader if he can't use a gun. Right. So we ask the question, does 25% leave Nick Clegg looking like Calamity Clegg? Back to you.
You've left Vince Cable looking bemused, a rather more academic than he usually, slightly disapproving, I suspect.
Jeremy's got a strange graph. He's somehow got 23% as more than 25%, which is baffling me somewhat.
You're so sharp. Only you would spot that. We were just discussing that earlier on. You're right. It's the bullet from my gun hit that can with such velocity it moved higher than it should have been.
Well, you've made life much easier for me.
You want to have heard it all in Texan. It's even more impressive.
Yes.
But 25, he says he'll be run out of town. You say he won't be run out of town.
No, he won't be run out of town.
And the slow decline doesn't worry you either.
No, it doesn't. I mean, if you go back to, the year I got into Parliament, 1997, big breakthrough, double the number of MPs. We went into that election, I think this was the great Paddy Ashdown election, with just over 10%, and I think had 16% on the night, but we greatly expanded our share in Parliament. And I think it's a combination of having strength in particular areas, doing well in them, building up a reputation as MPs, local councils, and we've continued to do that. And I think the key headline actually will not be that decline or that rather odd graph that you've got there, but it will be the fact that we've overtaken Labour, and who are now in third place as a result of these elections.
Okay. Ed Miliband.
Well, it's obviously been a disappointing night for us. This is one of the things that does happen at mid-term elections. I suppose I want to pick up on something that Ian Gibson said earlier on. I don't agree with everything he said. He was talking about people's sense of fairness, and I think that is an important thing. Clearly, the 10p was an issue for us in this respect. We've made amends on that. But I think showing that we speak to people's sense of fairness in this country seems to me to be a very important thing. And actually, I relish an argument with the Conservatives in the next period about who can better speak to people's sense of fairness in this country and solve some of the issues that people are raising.
The former Labour Chief Whip, Hilary Armstrong, who stood down from Parliament in 2007, is listening to this in Durham. Stood down, sorry, as Chief Whip.
Stood down from government.
Yes, stood down
David.
from government. I know. It's a typical presenter to think that means standing down from Parliament.
It's early in the morning.
It is early morning.
Yeah.
Hilary, what do you think of what's gone on? You just heard what Ed Miliband said.
Yes, Ed always speaks a lot of sense. We in Durham here, we have held on. We've not had a good night. But, you know, in many senses, the other two parties haven't really had a good night in Durham either. The Liberals have increased the number of seats, but I don't think they've done as well as they might have done. So, you know, for all of us, we've got to learn, we've got to listen, we've got to engage with people. This, of course, is a new council, and that in itself was quite controversial. So, you know, we're going to have to show in running this council that we can reach out to people, that we can really engage with people, and that they do feel that the new council is able to meet their needs and their aspirations.
You talk about the Durham, and of course the Durham council is what's called a shadow council, isn't it, the unitary one? It won't actually take power for a year. But just coming to Westminster...
Except that all the councillors begin tomorrow, and they are, in essence, the new council. There will still be districts for another year, but they are the new county council.
All right. But you talk about what's going on in Durham, but what about what's going on at Westminster and in government? You talk about the need to engage. You've had 11 years to engage. Are you saying you still haven't engaged?
Oh, you've got to do that anew again and again and again, and that's what you learn when you're in government, that all the good things you do, they just get pocketed, as we say, and you've always got to be looking to how you can really make sure that the renewed anxieties, the renewed aspirations, people's expectations are rising every year, and I welcome that, but it gives us new challenges.
But surely it's not expectations.
Got to make sure we meet those challenges.
It's not expectations that are rising. Surely at the moment it's the horror of what they see happening around them, to mortgages, to interest rates, for the lower paid with the 10% tax rate, for the people between 60 and 64 on pensions who suddenly lost out under a Labour government. Of people today, as being referred to, with old motor cars who suddenly find they're going to have to pay £400 tax for running an old banger. They're the people who are worried.
There are huge challenges, and you're right that those around the economy are the challenges of the moment, in a sense. But, David, if you look in this region at the huge changes that there have been over the last 11 years, those changes are so significant that, yes, there are problems now, but we don't have anything like the levels of unemployment that we had. But that is where, as I say, people's expectations are rising. They accept now that stable employment and stable levels of unemployment, you know, we've reduced those hugely in this region. They want to build on that. They don't want to go back from that. And so, yes, there are concerns about the economy worldwide, I might say. And this economy, with this Prime Minister who has led that economy so well over the last 11 years, we've just got to make sure that we keep hold of the economy, don't let it go into recession, and keep working with people.
But Hilary Armstrong,
you can't be in government.
But if you talk about
hang on
a second. You talk about the changes in the northeast. You talk about the regeneration of the area. It must be dismaying to you that overall the result of this is a 20% point gap between the Conservatives and Labour. That whatever's happening, the Conservatives are getting 44% tonight, and Labour 24%. People are turning to the Conservatives.
You can't be in government for all of this time without people looking for different things from you and looking for new things from you. And, you know, I've had the example, I think I've had a Conservative elected in my constituency for the first time for I don't know how long. But I have to say, you had to work very hard to work out she was a Tory. She had the best literature I've ever seen, and her slogan was no politics, no spin, no promises. Well, you know, as I say, you had to work out really hard she was a Conservative, and what she learnt was people are really rather disaffected with politics, and so she appealed to that. And they also thought she was energetic, she was young, and all of those things, but most of them didn't have a clue she was Tory. So, you know, they've made a gain in my constituency, but I suspect we're going to work on that and get that one back in the next time we have elections.
Hilary Armstrong, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. We rejoin Betsan Powys in Wales for news from Merthyr. Betsan.
Yes, that's right. News from Merthyr that Labour have lost control of Merthyr. Big gains, substantial gains. There's some 6 seats for the Liberal Democrats there. Now, they had targeted Merthyr. They had targeted the Labour leader, Harvey Jones, and he has apparently been ousted. So another a notch there for the Lib Dems. Although I gather from Bridgend, where they had been leading the council for the past 4 years, that Labour now believe that they can lead Bridgend by striking a deal with the independents. We'll find out about that sort of thing, not by tomorrow morning, but over the next few days. But another story to tell you as well, the Plaid Cymru story that is emerging. Now, they are, of course, now in coalition with Labour and had been wondering what effect that might have on this vote. Now, this is how it seems to be at the moment, and this really is coming from Plaid sources, that in Gwynedd, in their heartland, they are really taking some hits. There has been a big issue there about the closure and federation of small rural schools. A protest group, Llais Gwynedd, Gwynedd's Voice, has taken on some of Plaid's bigger names, and it looks as though there might be some big scalps there. Talk of the Plaid Cymru president possibly being ousted. Now, they had half expected that. In Ceredigion, though, the parliamentary prospective candidate for Plaid Cymru looks as though he has lost his seat as well. They seem to be doing better in the valleys than in their heartland, so they will be asking some serious questions of themselves, I'm sure, over the next few hours.
And thank you very much indeed. Let's join Emily Maitlis back in City Hall there. Emily.
Actually, David, shivering outside City Hall, which is, if the projected national share is right, where Ken Livingstone may find himself by this time tomorrow. Let's talk about that with Polly Toynbee and Michael Portillo. Do you think the game's over for Ken, Polly?
Well, if the figures at the moment are right, he would have to have a remarkable personal result to buck the trend of his party. And he is, after all, more associated with his party than he used to be. He, first of all, won as a maverick. He won as an anti-Labour candidate. And this time he's been campaigning with both Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, and is very much a Labour candidate, really. And he has made his peace with the Labour Party, and indeed has extracted large sums of money out of the Treasury in recent years when Gordon Brown was there to pay for huge infrastructure projects, to pay for Crossrail, to pay for a lot of money on the tube and the buses and that kind of thing.
But extraordinary. I mean, given how long, Michael's earlier point, given how long it took the Tory party to even find a candidate for mayor, that they could unseat the incumbent of well, not just 2 terms, but as you say, broadly his whole political life.
Yes, I think it'll be a very sad moment for Ken if that's what's really happened. He's devoted his whole life to London. It's the only thing he really cares about. He's truly devoted to the cause and has made the mayoralty something very much in his own image, which will be a hard act to follow.
Michael, what do you think happened on that campaign from day one to now with Boris? Because I was talking to Stanley, Boris's dad, who said, the media portrayed him as a buffoon and a comic. Of course he isn't. He's a serious, intelligent man who, can put his foot in it as Ken can. What do you think changed?
Well, he's an intelligent man. I don't know whether I'd use the word serious. Well, what changed, I think, was that people turned against Ken Livingstone, and that we live in an era of celebrity politics. So a man who's been on Have I Got News for You is someone that, people associate with and are prepared to...
Ken's been on Have I Got News for You more times than he has, I think.
And Ken's won 2 remarkable election victories. I think it is time to talk about Ken in the past tense. My obituary on him would be that he's actually been a remarkable figure in London. I mean, 28 years ago, we used to mock him for being in favour of gay rights and lesbian rights, and that's now become kind of mainstream. He's been, I think, the boldest politician, with the possible exception of Tony Blair, in the last 2 decades. He brought in the congestion charge, whatever you think about it, it was very bold. The Oyster card, which works. Been in favour of tall buildings, which is an extremely unpopular cause. So I think he has been a remarkable figure, actually.
And Boris has said he's going to cut down on crime, that basically Londoners live in fear of their neighbourhoods, of their streets, of their platforms, when they're catching the tube.
Yeah, it's all
That's it.
Crime has just fallen by a remarkable 12%. I mean, crime hasn't just fallen in this city, it's fallen right across Europe. It's amazing how much crime has fallen by. People are afraid of crime because opposition politicians stir up fear to it. The worst thing about Boris's plans is that he says he's going to cut Ken Livingstone's project for having 50% of all new housing affordable housing. Boris is going to be a mayor for the rich, I'm afraid, not for the poor.
OK, thank you both. It's very interesting. We know them both as Ken and Boris. I just heard Polly talk about Ken Livingstone there. There's something about using somebody's surname now that suggests they might be in the past tense. David.
Emily, thanks very much indeed. Let's have a look at now how things stand overall. And we've got a new gang of politicians, I'm glad to say, with us. Refreshing the programme. We'll be with them in a moment. Oh, well, there they are. Andy Burnham, Eric Pickles, Sarah Tether for the Liberal Democrats. This is the evidence that we've put before them. On councils, first of all, this is the state of play on control of councils. The Conservatives are currently up 7. Labour are down 3, the Liberal Democrats are down 1, and there are 3 fewer, no overall control. And on councillors, the running total at the moment, Conservatives up 124, Labour down 108, Liberal Democrats up 1, and others down 17. 382 others, let's just see how they're made up. 23 of them are Green, and they're up by 3. Plaid Cymru are up 3 on 19. The BNP hugely up relative to its the small number they had before. They're now on 11. That's up a net 8. Respect is up 1 and 4, and UKIP are up 2 at 4. So there have been gains right across the board for the people who normally appear just as others. The projected share steadied down now to this 44%. The Conservatives, this is the share of the vote projected from key wards today throughout England and Wales. Labour on 24, worst they've had for 40 years. Liberal Democrats on 25, a steady slide from where they were in 2004, others on 7. So, Eric Pickles, Shadow Minister for Communities and Local Government, you were in charge of this whole thing. Your cup's running over tonight.
Well, I will feel slightly pleased with what's happened, particularly, I think, because we've now killed any suggestion that we can't make progress in the north of England. The results in the north have been very pleasing. Results in the southwest have been very pleasing. And I think we've managed a share of the vote and a number of seats that commentators were saying would be impossible for us to reach. So obviously I'm rather pleased.
Is there a danger of thinking from this that the election's in the bag? The general election?
We'd be very foolish if we thought that. I suspect these results mean that it's at least 2 years away. A lot can happen in 2 years, but I can't help but feeling that the ship of state is heading towards the rocks.
What's still to be done for the Tory party if they're to achieve a victory at a general election?
Well, I mean, you've seen these things lots of times. What I think is likely to happen as we move through the summer, a lot more attention is going to be on us. I think we saw that in the race to the mayor. As soon as Boris looked like he was definitely a serious contender, an awful lot of attention went on what his policies were going to be. So throughout the summer we'll be unveiling some ideas. But I think what we're pleased about, Andy, and I mean maybe this time you made your run for leader, maybe this could be your big opportunity. This could be the tipping point of the Brown administration where you can perhaps fight out between yourself and Mr Miliband who could be the next leader. But I think what we will be doing is increasing our representation in the north of England and continuing not only in policy but also in those rather important things that David's been doing in terms of increasing our infrastructure.
Okay. Another little bit of bad news for you, Andy Burnham, before we come to you. Yes, add to your punishment. Merthyr Tydfil, the unitary council, Labour loss. That's extraordinary. Labour lose 9 seats in Merthyr. Liberal Democrats gain 6.
Fantastic result, absolutely fantastic.
Steady
result.
on, Sarah Tether, we'll come to in a moment. And others up 3, 19, which must be independents, I suspect, of all kinds. Are they? I don't know whether we can break down the others in this council. We can't. Okay. So, Andy Burnham, what do you think has gone wrong? I mean, and please don't say what everybody else of your party has been saying. You've got to listen, and this is the, global economic problems. You've heard it all. Just say something original about what's got to happen.
No pressure there, then.
Long night, isn't it?
At 3 o'clock in the morning. Thank you very much, David. Well,
Let me say two things. I think it is unprecedented. You say 40 years, the worst projected national share. Well, we're in unprecedented territory. I mean, we have never had a Labour government of this length. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, I don't think the economy has featured in an election in Britain in the way it has at this one for some time. I'm out on the doorstep in Leigh today. People are talking about food prices, fuel prices, general uncertainty, and raising issues around the economy, and that's a new thing too. And I think that does come back onto the incumbent government perhaps more than other issues.
But you're saying they're blaming a Chancellor whose virtues as Chancellor have been constantly extolled before he became Prime Minister. They've now suddenly turned on him and are blaming him for what's happened to the economy.
No,
Is that what's happening?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that people are feeling the pinch. They're feeling the under pressure in their domestic finances.
Why should they turn on the government? Why should they turn to the Tories because of that?
Well, I'm not saying that they should. I say...
No, but that's what they're doing, according to your analysis.
No, I think tonight people have voted possibly on the economy, but I think people have voted on a whole range of different issues. And I don't think the results tonight are sending any one message, actually. I think they are... In places, we've actually had some pretty good results, actually. I would say in Liverpool, we've had a very good result in the North West. Eric says, big strides in the North. I don't see it, to be honest. I don't see any real inroads in Liverpool or Manchester. The real inner cities.
That's pretty close to Manchester, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Bury always was and has been. I'm not saying that you've not made progress. Clearly, you've got a foothold now, Eric, where there was not one there before. But I would just caution against reading too much into them.
But you're cherry picking results, because the overall result, the projected national share, is what I was talking about. And the gap of 20 is when was the last gap of 20 between Tories and Labour?
Oh, that's an easy question to answer. Never.
There you are.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that these are a good set of results. Of course not. I mean, these look like they will be a disappointing set of results. We've got more to come tomorrow on the Yorkshire side of the North particularly, so we'll see what they say. But of course, these look like a disappointing set of results for the Labour Party. Now, what I was trying to say is that I think there are a number of complex reasons behind that. I will say what other ministers are saying, because this is what we have to do. We have to digest those results, we have to reflect upon them, and then we have to respond in the right way. I'm actually confident we will do that. And if we're to make the comparison between the major government of the early 90s and the position we're in today, we actually are well placed to stand the economic uncertainty. And actually, I would say we have a very united cabinet and Labour Party.
Yeah. Sarah Tether, from the Liberal Democrats' point of view, what do you make of it? It's been, I mean, you've had some successes. You actually seem to have gained control of Liverpool by coaxing a former Labour councillor at the count after the vote was in. This is...
Well, I suspect it demonstrates the unpopularity of Labour on the ground, that even an independent is prepared to defect on the night to keep Labour out. I mean, whatever the result in Liverpool, I have to say I'm proud of our record there. We have transformed that city, and whatever the future is, that people's lives will be changed.
1 star, according to the Audit Commission, the worst financially.
I think you need to go a little bit more often.
But if you, I was there only a month or so ago.
The worst administered council in the
Yeah, that's based on finances. That's based on finances.
Well,
when you
what
actually
is local government about if it's not finances?
Forget about the finance.
All right, let me finish. All right, you've had your go, Eric, at length. But I mean, if you look at the result, for example, on education, where it was a failing council when the Liberal Democrats took over, it was going to be, education was going to be privatised. Now it's 3-star. You look at regeneration. You look at sports facilities. They have made a huge difference. But I do actually think, I'm personally quite relieved by the results so far this evening. As my colleague Vince Cable was saying earlier on in the evening, we were at a very high watermark in 2004. Labour was then extremely unpopular. The Conservatives had Michael Howard. As I said, let me finish.
Sarah,
and he's given time.
You did well in 2004 because you had a strong policy, as Charles Kennedy explained at the beginning of this programme, which won a lot of support, which was opposition to the Iraq War. Once that began to fade, you too have faded. You've gone 29, 28, 27, 26, now 25.
Yeah, but there is a chance that we'll be pushing Labour into third place this evening. And that is, you know, that's only happened once before, and that was in 2004. And we are making gains at Labour's expense, and we are also making gains at the Conservatives' expense in the marginal seats.
Cat bounce out of this set of elections.
In the marginal seats. Look, OK,
Eric.
Eric, think about those seats that you want back from us. Think about Cheltenham. Think about Eastleigh. Where's your smile then?
Okay.
Because we could lay a whole load of things. Look, you've got the world's worst unpopular government, and you can't even increase your position.
Right. Let's look to tomorrow for a moment. Let's look to tomorrow for a moment, because there may be worse news, or it may be that Ken Livingstone wins in London, which may show he's not. But we'll just join Jeremy Vine for a moment and see what he has to say about this. Jeremy.
So, what was your favourite cartoon when you were younger, or your favourite comic? Was it the Whoopee or Dandy or Beano? We've put together some of the cartoon characters with the help of Patrick Blair, people who've populated the mayoral contest since the job was reincarnated in 2000. And, of course, the biggest one of the lot is Ken Livingstone there. Do you remember? He was a member of the Labour Party before that first contest. He wanted to stand. They didn't want him to. Oh! He got the Monty Python boot. So then it becomes a contest between Mr. Livingstone and Desperate Dobbo, Frank Johnson, against Red Ken. Let's see how they get on. Watch out for that ruler, Ken. It's always nastiest between colleagues. Result of that, Ken was on his own to face the Conservative Nozza Norris. They had a fight too. I'm going to get down this time. Someone shouted something about the congestion charge, and it all kicked off. The result of that, 58%, 2000 to Ken Livingstone, 42% to Steve Norris. Spool forwards 4 years, 2004, same two again. Ken's put down his bendy ruler and picked up a bendy bus. And the result, it was a bit closer this time, 55% to Ken Livingstone, Red Ken, and Nozza Norris on 45%. So that was the state of play in 2004. Well, then, of course, things change, don't they? And we have two new candidates on the block. Red Ken, Lord Snooty Johnson, and PC Paddock. And what a rumble this has turned out to be this year. It's been uglier than ever. It's over crime, it's over corruption in City Hall, taxation, and all kinds of other things. Boris Johnson had a plan to make the traffic lights green for longer. They've ended up battered and bruised. We don't know how they're doing because they're not counting the votes yet. That's one of the frustrations about tonight. We can look back at the polls, though. Let's go back to January, see what the internet polls were saying. 44% for Ken, 40% for Boris. So Ken with a clear lead, Red Ken. But by March, this had happened in those internet polls. Have a look at this. Boris Johnson, Lord Snooty, miles ahead of Ken Livingstone, according to those polls. April told a different story. And this is where we left it, very, very close indeed. That's why this election for London Mayor is so exciting, because we just don't know which way it's going to go. And, of course, the frustration of tonight is we just won't make any progress.
And the sad thing, Jeremy, about all that is that they claim this is the most brilliantly efficient new way of counting electronically. And we don't get the result till late tomorrow afternoon or early evening or something.
It's great, isn't it? You bring in new technology and people use it as an excuse to go to bed.
I mean, it's a it's a disaster.
Yeah,
and I
well,
mean, there's an idea. And what's the point of voting if you don't know what the result is and we can't all enjoy it?
I know, there's something, I mean,
pointless.
just listening to your discussion of this year, there's something wonderful about this late night moment we're all in, and the politicians talk with a bit more candour, and we see how they all get on with each other, and it's a really great little petri dish for the politics, and not to have the London Mayor in the dish is frustrating.
Oh, well, I'm glad you've spotted the candour.
I was getting worried from it.
I'm going to join Peter Tatchell, who's waiting for us in Oxford. Actually, he's not. He's in London, by the looks. He's behind Tower Bridge behind him. Peter Tatchell, thanks for joining us. Now, you're a member of the Green Party and a candidate for Oxford East. Now, how have the Greens done? Our figures show the Greens are down from their position in these same elections in 2004 and slightly lower than you were last year. That it's a bit of a disappointment for the Greens tonight.
It's been mixed results, but overall we have made some slight gains. But the big story is Norwich. In Norwich, we've won 3 seats. We've overtaken the Liberal Democrats. We're now just 2 seats behind Labour. So the Greens are the official opposition in Norwich, and I'm very confident come the next election we will overtake Labour and be the governing party in Norwich. The big fright for Labour is that in Norwich, particularly in Charles Clarke's Norwich South seat, the Greens outpolled Labour, and that would mean that if those results were replicated in the next general election, Charles Clarke would lose his seat and Adrian Ramsay, the Green candidate, would be elected. So that's a very, very encouraging sign.
Yeah, what is it about Norwich, then, that's got some message that the whole of the rest of the country has failed to pick up?
I think the local Green Party there has been very, very solid, very consistent, very active on the ground, very imaginative policies. It's pioneering so many local initiatives, not just on green issues, but on housing issues, transport. It's opened out the green agenda to be a social justice agenda, which I think has had a big appeal to a lot of former Labour voters who are very disillusioned with Labour and see the Greens as the party of social justice.
But just there, nowhere else. The message isn't getting through. And what's more, the people are starting to steal your thunder, aren't they? I mean, there's not a Tory who won't say vote blue, get green.
Well, that's what they say, but of course, you know, David Cameron famously pointed to Kirklees Council saying the Tories there had brought in all these policies. In fact, it was the Green councillors on Kirklees Council who initiated all the new initiatives on green issues,
Okay, well,
which the Tories then took up.
Take your own neck of the woods, Oxford, hung council, Greens, down 1.
Yeah, that is a disappointment. The results there are fairly mixed. We are, you know, doing well in some of the seats. We're close second in some of them. There does seem to have been a bit of a Labour revival there. I think, you know, that's an area where we've got work to do and where we will be doing more work to make sure that we restore that confidence and build on it. So I'm sure that Oxford, East and West, is strong Green territory, and we just have to make sure that we get the message out and sharpen our message to local voters about the initiatives we've brought in.
Do you think, just one last thing, you voted to have a leader, I can't remember how many years ago it was, a long time back, you still haven't got one. Do you think it would be better if you had a leader, perhaps you yourself, and could actually take the party somewhere, instead of having these sort of shambles of, you know, speakers, principal speakers, whatever they're called? I don't mean to insult the Green Party, but it's the principal speakers, that's what they mean.
Yeah, we like to think we're a democratic, non-hierarchical party, more egalitarian than the others, but it's true we are going to have, from November, a Green leader and deputy leader, or 2 co-leaders. The party will vote on that in November, and I'm sure that we will elect someone. I'm not going to be standing, but I'm sure we'll elect someone who will be able to sharpen the Green message and show that we are a serious party, not just on green issues, but on democracy, civil liberties, human rights and social justice.
Peter Tatchell, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Nick.
Well, some interesting analysis that's just come in from the boffins behind the scenes about where Labour's vote is falling most, and it's falling most in its heartland. So according to our key ward analysis, it's down by 5 points in Labour heartland seats compared with 3 points across the key wards as a whole. Now, you may say, who cares? You may even think, oh, well, that's all right, we'll get those votes back if you're a member of the Labour Party. The difficulty is it'll fuel those in the Labour Party who say, look, we've abandoned our core vote, we've abandoned those that we should be helping. That will encourage those people in the Labour Party to make that argument about what change should be made. Others, like Charles Clarke, who we saw earlier, will be arguing for a completely different message, and that will pull the Prime Minister in 2 different directions.
Andy Burnham?
Well, I mean, I think Nick's right. You could read those figures 2 ways. I mean, you might say represent a heartland seat. I was out in Leigh today, and as I was indicating to you before, David, I was picking up real concerns about people's finances and the economy. I mean, interestingly, those are the seats where the Tories, where they're not gaining as much ground, but they really do need to make gains. So next door to me, we have Bolton West, which is Ruth Kelly's seat, and that is a seat where the Tories absolutely need to make inroads, and Bolton steadfastly refused to go Tory tonight, and I think that is a very significant result. Bolton is one of those seats that people always look to. It hasn't gone. And I think we in the Northwest will take some encouragement from that.
Yes.
Let me go back to something we were talking about earlier on. I was very disappointed that you didn't say, Andy Burnham, that Labour should listen, because I decided I was going to collect £1 from every Labour politician who said that they were going to listen. You used an awful lot of other verbs, but not that one. But what you did say was that, of course, we have to respond in the right way. And one of the things that I haven't been picking up, and I don't think either David or Nick has been picking up, is what would the right response be? What is it that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and your colleagues, what should they now be doing, as not just saying, but doing, that might make a difference between now and what we now think is going to be 2010, don't we?
Well, I mean, that is the question. I mean, that's the phrase I use because I feel that says it for me. I mean, I think we do need to reflect and then respond in the right way. And as I say, not be arrogant, take these results on the chin, and then come back with proposals that respond to what we think the different issues that have been at play in this election. But tonight, I mean, I can't. Tonight this is to be discussed by the Cabinet for us to come back with proposals. But I think you will see that. I mean, there are already ideas that colleagues are bringing forward, and I think you will see the fight back come on. I mean, I think we are going to move into a phase where there is very clearly a fight on, and the Tory party are going to be under a lot more scrutiny. I actually don't think, if you ask a member of the public on the street today, that they could probably name a Tory policy. I think what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years is rebranding going on. Mood, gesture, rebranding. Just let me say this, Eric. I think we've not actually... So people have seen the mood music, but they've not actually subjected the Tories to scrutiny. I think that they are going to do that now.
And if you're right, and it's just the mood music, just look at the effect that the mood music has had yesterday in the voting and how it would affect our House of Commons. Jeremy's got our favourite little scene to end the evening. Just have a look at this. Oh, well, that's not Jeremy.
We'll come down, if you can, through the sky and land on Whitehall and turn left and look for the House of Parliament here. And where is St Stephen's Gate? Hang on. Yep, got it. In we go. Through to Central Lobby. Go left to the Commons, of course, down through the Reporters' Lobby and in through the doors. And hello, you find me here in the House of Commons. And we'll have a look, shall we, at how the results, the projected national share would populate these seats. But first, let's have a look at who's in there at the moment, what the last general election did to put Labour MPs in. 351 won here in 2005. And this mark down here, I'll just show you this bit of grey here, is the 324 mark, past which a party must go to have a majority. So 324 in the House of Commons in 2005, and Labour, of course, the largest single party. And on the opposition benches over here, the Conservatives with 192, and the Lib Dems then with 63, I think it is. Yes, 63. And then the other MPs next to them. And all of that adds up to a majority, a Labour majority there, 66 seats. So that's where we are. That's the existing House of Commons. These are the MPs in the chamber who were elected in 2005. Let's send them down to Annie's bar. Let's start again. Let's take our projected national share and find out where the parties stand if what happened in the local elections. We've already done an extrapolation into a vote across the country. Now we take that vote and put it into the House of Commons. You appreciate it. It's a slightly tenuous exercise, but for your enjoyment, here we go. Biggest party, have a guess. Here they come, those blue Conservative MPs, and way past. By the way, next House of Commons, it'll be 326 you need for a majority, and they're way past it with 394 MPs. By far the largest single party in the House of Commons, and very easy for them to govern without assistance. Who would be around to assist them should they want to talk to another party in the very, very unlikely event? Labour? What's happened to Labour? 169 seats for Labour. Much reduced, in fact, rather down to the sort of level Conservatives were at in 1997 after Tony Blair's Labour landslide. Lib Dems on 59, so level pegging pretty much for them, and then some others as well. And we could possibly have a look at the leaders, shall we? Where are they? These party leaders here. Mr. Brown over there, David Cameron here, sitting, standing, waiting to discuss what goes forward. Mr. Cameron not looking too happy in our graphic, but he ought to be. Conservative majority of 138. David.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Well, there we are. John McDonnell, you ran against the leadership, challenged. You had a try. We have another try now on the basis of this as a Labour, disaffected Labour MP.
Well, I couldn't go on the ballot paper last time, if you remember, because I couldn't go enough nominations. Well, the rules are now you need double the amount, so I doubt if I could go on the ballot paper this time. But
do you think there should be a challenge to the leadership?
Well, I think part of the problem that we've got now is because we didn't have a leadership election last year. We never had the debate around the policies that are causing us the problems at the moment.
What kind of debate would you have liked to have seen? What sort of issues would you like to change?
Well, the issue, people want to know if we're on their side, and the 10p issue has been coming up time and time again. So I would have liked to debate on taxation, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're portrayed as increasing the taxes for the poorest and yet not doing anything around non-domiciles or corporation tax or city bonuses, those sorts of issues.
Everybody's been talking about the need for Gordon Brown to listen, but do you think he's going to change tack now, or do you think it is going to carry on much as it has been?
Well, here's the problem. Gordon Brown became leader in an almost atmosphere of euphoria because he wasn't Tony Blair, but also because he promised change, and those changes haven't come about, and I think that's why there's an element of disillusionment. So, yeah, it is about listening, but it's not. Listening's no good unless you act, so there has to be a radical change of policies.
There's been major losses in Wales for 3 councils Labour's lost control of now. Here they are, just have a look at them. Flintshire, Labour down 13 councillors in Flintshire. Conservatives up 5 and the Liberal Democrats up 1. Merthyr, Labour down 9, Liberal Democrats up 6. And there's a Blaenau Gwent as well, I think, which we don't have the figures for right now. Betson, it looks like a disaster for Labour in Wales tonight.
Well, yes, you were talking earlier about where Labour was truly losing out in its heartlands, where that is certainly the picture here in Wales. Those unitary authorities, since becoming unitary authorities, have only been led by Labour. Well, no more. The same can be said about Newport, the only city that Labour held, well, no more again. I asked earlier, was Rhodri Morgan's Labour going to feel the full force of an anti-Labour swing? Well, I think we now have the answer, and the answer is clearly yes.
Betson, thanks very much. We're coming to the end of this, but Andy Burnham, Tony King said after about an hour of this programme this was going to be a truly dreadful night for Labour, and that is what it is, isn't it? A truly dreadful night.
The disappointing results, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say these are not disappointing results for the party. Of course they are. They are mixed results in some ways. We can look to places where we've done quite well. So I mean, I think we're going to have to look at these results tomorrow, see what they mean, look where we've done OK, but overall, yeah, they're a disappointing set of results.
John McDonnell, looking as if you're half crazed when you say that.
Rank and file Labour Party activists and Labour MPs are saying the same thing as me. If we try and interpret it then that way, we sleepwalk towards a Tory government. Tony King's point of previous elections is you look at the trend. After general elections, at the next local government election, we usually dip, but we bounce back. On each occasion now, we bounce back less. This time, the bounce could be into a Tory government. That's what we all fear. So it is about listening, but it's about changing the policies.
Very brief, 30 seconds from each of you, then we must stop. Tony King.
I have to agree with what everybody is saying all evening. It's been a dreadful night for the Labour Party. There's no getting around that. And it's been a very good night for the Tories. There's no getting around that either.
Nick?
The Labour Party has no memory of an experience like this under Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. They have no guide as to what to do about it. And what's striking is there is no suggestion coming as to what should be done about it. Argument, yes, for some on the left, some on the right, some in the government that they should listen. No message as to quite what they should listen to.
And tomorrow, of course, they have the results from London and Ken Livingstone, and we know that Labour has to hold London if it's to win at a general election.
With the clear consensus building that Boris Johnson will be the next mayor.
So there we go. Here are the final figures. Projected share. Conservatives 44, Labour 24, Liberal Democrats 25, in second place, others on 7. That's the result of these local elections this year from all of us here. Remember, Ken Livingstone's result tomorrow evening from all of us here. Good morning.